government that is ambitious for Scotland with a stronger NHS, building on the progress that has already been made to make it even easier for our fellow citizens to access NHS services when they need them. Ambitious for Scotland with the best cost of living support in the United Kingdom, protected and expanded with new ways to help our fellow Scots with their weekly costs. This was a cost of living election. This was the #1 issue for voters across Scotland, and so I give this guarantee I will be a First Minister focused on the cost of living, leading a government that is on the side of fairness, a government that will work to deliver a fair deal for all in our land who are struggling to make ends meet. And ambitious for Scotland because we as a government have a vision that can truly transform our nation and its prospects. The one real change that can take us from this decade and more of political chaos and economic stagnation within the United Kingdom to greater security and prosperity as an independent member state of the European Union. That's the fresh start that Scotland so badly needs. And, Presiding Officer, it is the future this Parliament can endorse this afternoon. Prosperity, fairness and security. As we begin this new journey of this new session of our nation's Parliament, these will be my watchwords. Greater prosperity for our nation, with a relentless focus on supporting innovation, on enterprise and doing all that we can to maximise Scotland's productivity and increase our levels of sustainable economic growth. That will mean rethinking the structures of the state, with more strategic regions empowered to make the most of the many economic opportunities and advantages that they enjoy. And there are many diverse and vibrant cities, the breathtaking beauty of our landscape, fertile farmland, iconic industries and resource-rich seas. Reimagining the state as an enabler, with overly complex and cumbersome bureaucracy removed, unnecessary regulation that gets in the way of investment and job creation simplified. Regulation serves a vital purpose, but to work, it must be regulation that both protects and permits. Regulation that provides pathways, not obstacles to investment, opportunity and growth. At the outset of this Parliament, I want to emphasise the centrality to the government I lead of achieving higher levels of sustainable economic growth. To do so, we will invest in our young people, who are the source and foundation of future success, and we will empower our educators. 150,000 apprenticeships will be put in place, teacher-pupil ratios kept as the best in the UK, more schools and colleges rebuilt or upgraded. We will also invest in essential infrastructure, necessary road improvements, including our commitment to complete the dualling of the A9 and the A96, new stations and ongoing electrification of our rail network, and investment of £4.9 billion to build thousands more homes that people can afford. We will expand our successful Tech Scaler programme to new sectors like creative industries, food and drink, climate and agricultural technologies, advanced manufacturing and space technology, and introduce a new national network of pre-start centres to support our brightest and best to test and refine their ideas before progressing to Tech Scaler. And we will also establish a high-growth unit to identify and support businesses with the potential to grow and to grow significantly. Have no doubt that Scotland knows what it means to lead the world. We were at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, thanks to our wealth of natural resources, thanks to a spirit of enterprise and an openness to the world, and thanks to a skilled and determined workforce with a pride in the many wonders of engineering that they produced. As we stand at the beginning of a new age of economic transformation, Scotland has the necessary resources, an abundance of clean, green energy. We have the innovators, thanks to world-class research universities, and a skilled workforce, practical skills, technical skills, young people who are among the very best educated in Europe. This new technological revolution is made for Scotland to succeed in biotech, space, precision engineering, fintech and in more. Scotland's got what it takes to prosper in the decades to come, and Scotland has a government that's determined to make it happen. Presiding Officer, our programme is for a more prosperous Scotland, but it is not wealth generation for its own sake. Under my leadership, this is and will always be a social democratic government. That means it will be wealth creation for a purpose, to make our nation fairer, with those with the least given a helping hand by those with the most. Greater prosperity felt in people's pockets through driving our commitment to cap bus fares at £2 nationwide to help people to get to work, to get into town more affordably. And the reason that we will legislate to help people with the cost of the weekly shop, so that hard-pressed households can have the peace of mind that a basket of healthy essentials for their kids, for their family, will be available at a fair, affordable and reliable price. Greater national prosperity felt directly by the people that we serve, underpinning also our pledge to deliver more and more flexible childcare, to provide additional, more targeted support through an increase in the Scottish Child Payment to £40 a week for babies under 1. I know that raising children takes not only love, but also time and money. And I give this clear promise to Scotland's young families today. You have a government determined to help ease the burden and give you that bit more breathing space. And because we know the challenges that many renters experience in our society and the struggles they face as they seek to take the first step on the housing ladder, we will be there to offer a helping hand, support for first-time buyers of up to £10,000 towards their deposit. Policies with the real-world needs of our citizens at their heart, policies that will make life easier for many and our nation fairer for all. Fairness through a progressive taxation system and compassionate social security system, both possible because of new powers gained by this Parliament in recent years. And the more powers we have, and there will be more, the more we can achieve. Fairness, because we will not rest until every child in Scotland has the opportunity to succeed, regardless of the circumstances into which they were born. That is a big ambition, but child poverty has been a scourge in Scotland for far too long. It's been a weight around our necks, holding us back as a society because too many are unable to reach their full potential. And to have such deep poverty, such intergenerational poverty, in a land of such plenty is, let us be absolutely clear, morally wrong. We've made progress, and we should be proud of that progress. But we must now redouble our efforts so that child poverty can be eradicated from our land. Eradicated because our public services are working together effectively to support those in greatest need. Eradicated because our economy is growing and new resources become available to invest. Eradicated because of targeted interventions to increase income, reduce cost and create new opportunities for work and learning. Fairness also because we are resolute in our determination to pass on to the next generation a land that is more resilient in the face of climate change. Climate change and its effects remain the greatest challenge facing our planet. Scotland has a part to play in our own actions to reduce emissions, but also and more so through our expertise and innovation, through our ability to export carbon-free electricity. In these ways, we can help other nations reduce their carbon emissions too. Scotland may be small by some standards, but our contribution has always been great and our ambition even greater. Let us be clear, given all the horrifying consequences of climate inaction, there is no fair future for our country, for our planet. There is no prosperous or secure future for either if we do not take the necessary steps to make our nation carbon neutral once and for all. And fairness also, that is and must be given effect in a just transition that right now is under threat as a result of dangerous and damaging Westminster policies on energy and industry, Westminster policies that once again treat Scotland as little more than an afterthought. Presiding Officer, Westminster control over Scotland's energy resources has been an unmitigated disaster for our nation. What has been done to the North East today is just one more example. There can be no doubt that the old ways of the Westminster Government have failed Scotland. So let us say loud and clear, for a just transition, for Scotland's energy wealth to fully benefit Scotland's people and communities, Scotland's energy must be in Scotland's hands. Energy for Scotland is a source of opportunity, of prosperity and of security. At a time when energy prices are rising, at a time of energy scarcity, Scotland as an exporter of energy should have less to fear. We produce more oil, more gas, more electricity than we need, and yet the prices we pay as households and businesses are amongst the highest in Europe. It simply does not add up. We have the energy and in abundance, but we do not have the power. So I repeat, and Parliament will have the opportunity this week to agree that Scotland's energy must be in Scotland's hands. Presiding Officer, these are times of great global uncertainty. Wages have stagnated, costs have risen, with the threat of a new round of inflation, higher interest rates and lower growth. Technology is fueling rapid, unpredictable change. Parents are worried about what the future holds for their children, and I know that for many, even maybe for most, it can feel as though very little can be relied on anymore. That is why we must give our citizens confidence that there is solid ground upon which they can stand, more financial security, because they can see that help with costs is at the very top of this government's agenda. A sense of security that comes from knowing that the right health and social care will be available when it is needed, from cradle to grave. Our NHS has weathered a storm, a decade of unprecedented pressures, from COVID to austerity, rampant inflation to Brexit. Dealing with the pandemic was a generational challenge, and one that our NHS staff rose to. We faced the very worst, and we have proved ourselves resilient. A corner is being turned, operations and GP numbers are up, inpatient, outpatient and day case waits are all down. Progress has been made, and progress will continue with a renewed focus on driving down waiting times by increasing capacity. We will invest an additional £90 million in elective capacity and increase investment in specialist recruitment and training places. Over the next 100 days, we will deliver at least 50,000 operations and procedures, and by the end of this Parliament, we will ensure that no one waits longer than 26 weeks for treatment. We will reduce demand on acute services by investing more in prevention and early intervention, including one-stop shops in communities to provide lung and heart health MOTs. There will be a clear shift in the balance of care, with more delivered in the community. Over the next 3 years, general practice will receive an additional £531 million, meaning even more family doctors can be recruited as part of our plans to make it easier to access a GP and end the ATM rush. A plan that will be turbocharged with more GP walk-in clinics. In the next 100 days, we'll open at least 5 more and confirm locations for another 14. Open, evenings, weekends, no appointment needed. Greater security also for women and girls, with a misogyny bill to outline misogynistic harassment and abuse in Scotland. A ban on the use of technology to create and possess deepfake intimate images. A ban on the possession of online material containing sex offences against women and children. And a ban on mobile phones in our school. Presiding Officer, fairness will be built into the very foundations of the new nation-state that we are aiming and seeking to build. A Scottish Constitution that protects our NHS and guarantees the fundamental human dignity of each and every person in our land. A Scottish Constitution rooted in the values that speak to the very best of who we are. And security will come from being in charge of our own destiny, the true security that we have all experienced, that we all strive for, when we know that our future is in our own hands. When we know, no matter the challenge, that we are able to choose and chart the right course. Security also from a renewed partnership with our neighbours in the European Union, a true partnership of equals with 27 other nations, friends and peers. We share a continent and we share a future. Greater prosperity, because with the opportunity of independence, we have the control over our own energy wealth and are able to trade freely with the biggest single market in the world as members once again of the European Union. Together, these offer a golden opportunity, and it's one that I believe people will vote for resoundingly when our nation has once again the ability to decide our own future in an independence referendum. And that is, of course, why Westminster currently says no. But to build on the words of one of the fathers of our self-government, we are the people, we are the people's parliament, and we say yes. Today is the start of a process that I believe will lead Westminster to a yes to a referendum and Scotland to a yes to independence. Today, I seek confirmation from this Parliament that this is a voluntary union and that the people of Scotland have the right to decide whether we remain in that union. That is a principle that should be accepted by all those in this chamber who believe in independence, but also those who believe in the union. Because what is at stake are the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland. The people have elected a new Parliament. This new Parliament has the opportunity today to make its position clear. I invite Parliament to put Scotland's future in Scotland's hands.
Thank you, First Minister. The next item of business is a debate on motion 105 in the name of John Swinney on Ambitious for Scotland. I'd invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on John Swinney to move the motion.
Moved.
Thank you. And I now call on Anis Sarwar to speak to and move amendment 105.4.
Thank you so much, President Officer. Let me start with saying I'll move the amendment in my name, because normally that's what often members forget to do at the end of their speeches, so I'll start with that. Can I first of all say I welcome much of the content of the First Minister's opening statement, but the reality is the balance of the statement and the motion is stark. Overwhelming majority of the statement focused on issues that I think people would want to be the concentration of this SNP government. But if you look at the balance of the motion we're being asked to vote on today, it's overwhelmingly about one issue and one issue alone, and that is the SNP First Minister's only ambition and only obsession, and that is the issue of independence. And I think that is a missed opportunity in this first debate of this new Parliament. But let me make a broader point. Is one of the big challenges we've had facing our politics in Scotland is far too often the instincts of this SNP government and the SNP as a party is to try and talk about Scotland as if it's one homogenous unit, one mind, one view, and not that there is a mix of views across the country. Because the reality is, it's not that Scotland has one voice or one view on a referendum, or Scotland has one voice or one view on independence. There are big differing views right across this country. And so if he truly wants to be a First Minister for all of Scotland, he can't deny those variants of views. And I'll say a bit more about ambition in a moment. But let me just say, to hear someone that has been in government for 20 years to plead for some kind of fresh start, frankly, people will not believe it. This is a government and this is a First Minister that has spent more time in the last 20 years telling Scotland what he can't do rather than what he can do. Because this ultimately is a party that plays into the very same fear and blame I spoke about last week. Those that want to create fear in our communities in order to divide us, and those who want to pass the buck and responsibility by pointing the fingers of blame somewhere else rather than taking responsibility for their own actions and their own responsibility in government. And much of what John Swinney spoke about in his opening statement is actually to correct the record that he has helped build in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, the SNP have created the layer after layer of bureaucracy and public sector bodies that he now says he wants to strip away. Year after year for the last 20 years is this SNP government that's taken power away from the regions of Scotland and centralised power that he now says he wants to push back out to the regions. Happy to give way.
Thank you, President Officer, and thank Mr Sarwar for giving way. Of course, we've had a test of some of Mr Sarwar's theories on this in recent weeks, where we've had an election where the people have decided. Would it not be better for Mr Sarwar to allow the power to be in the people's hands and to allow the people to be able to decide on their own future by supporting this motion?
Well, Mr Gray is going to argue his view, I'm going to argue my view. That's democracy. And the reality is, right across the country, there is a mix of views, because it was very clear during the election. Actually, the First Minister said in his own statement, he didn't say it was an independence election. He said it was a cost of living election, because people voted in this election based on what was happening in their pockets and what was happening in their public services. He also mentioned energy, but the reality is this SNP government sold our energy wealth on the cheap. And what this Parliament needs to do is to redefine community benefit and community ownership for lots of parts across this country. But we also need a different kind of government. Not more gimmicks, not more grievance, but actually getting things done. And another area, that I'll agree with John Swinney is there is big global insecurity and global instability. And at a time of global insecurity and instability, what people across this country need is a relentless focus on the issues that matter to them right now and that is accessing those vital public services, it is bringing down their bills, and it is making sure they don't continue to pay more and more and get less and less in return. So that's the ambition I want to speak about today, because there is no shortage of ambition in our country. Families are ambitious for what happens to them. They're ambitious for their children. They're ambitious for their communities. But where is the ambition to return the NHS to the founding principles, free and available at the point of need, broken by this SNP government? The record shows that people are paying £12,000 for a hip replacement, £8,000 for a knee replacement, £5,000 for a cataract under this SNP government. That's how you return that ambition. Where's the ambition to make Scotland's schools the best in the world again, falling down the international league tables under this government? Where's the ambition to make people feel safe and secure in their communities? But the reality is that when the SNP talks about ambition, what they really mean is their own party's ambition or their own individual's ambition. And we got a really stark example of it this week. People who are their most vociferous supporters asked to put their hard-earned cash into a movement that they believed in and they support, which is their democratic right. Put their hard-earned cash. And what did people that were charged with the responsibility do? They robbed them of that opportunity. They embezzled them of that opportunity. And the reality is there is countless opportunities that have been embezzled by this SNP government for 20 years for people across this country. So yes, we need ambition. Yes, we need to deliver for people across this country, but that requires a different kind of government. It requires honesty, it requires transparency, and it requires actually putting into words what the First Minister said in much of his opening statement, rather than using those issues to divide Scot against Scot. So what we need is real ambition to bring down waiting lists, real ambition to end the ATM rush for a GP, real ambition to make life more affordable for families, real ambition to bring down bills, real ambition to return police on our streets, real ambition to build the homes this country needs, real ambition to make sure we have economic growth for every part of our country, real ambition so every child gets the opportunities they need to succeed, real ambition to end homelessness and eradicate poverty in this country. We need a parliament and a government to have ambition that matches the people of this great country. And that can only be achieved if John Swinney focuses on the issues at hand and the issues that matter every day, rather than looking for reasons to divide us.
Thank you. Members who take interventions don't have the time taken from them, but it's still up to them whether or not they take interventions. I now call on Ross Greer to speak to and move Amendment 105.3.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I see Mr Sarwar's constructive and collaborative tone lasted about a week in this place. Clearly no lessons learned from that election. I move the amendment in my name, Presiding Officer. Every Green MSP elected to this Parliament was elected on a mandate to support the cause of independence. The gains that we made make this the biggest ever majority for independence in this Parliament. And we are here to assert that mandate because, of course, it's normal in a democracy that a parliamentary majority can pursue the issues that it's won a mandate from the voters on. But what we've seen throughout this campaign, what we're seeing this afternoon in Parliament, are increasingly desperate mental gymnastics from unionist parties who claim that we somehow don't have that mandate. We heard from the Labour Party during the campaign that their win in the 2024 general election in Scotland was a mandate against another independence referendum. But that only has any credibility whatsoever if you ignore the fact that they rejected the SNP's equivalent mandates in 2015, 2017 and 2019. We've heard the once-in-a-generation line, that it's not yet been a generation. I would ask those, not quite yet, I would ask those who use that particular line to reflect on the fact that 800,000 people were old enough to vote at the election just a few weeks ago, but who were not old enough to vote in the referendum in 2014. Is it really credible to continue with that line that it's not yet been a generation? I absolutely respect the cause of unionism. I respect those who disagree with me and my party on independence. It's important that unionists are well represented in this Parliament. But whether we are for or against independence, surely everyone who sits in this place should be a Democrat. And democracy is not a one-off event. The public are no more bound by the vote in 2014 today than this Parliament is bound by its predecessors. Democracy is a system that we live in every day of our lives. And this debate, I think, requires some honesty. Is this a voluntary union? Was it only a voluntary union until 2014, but it's not anymore? We've got to wonder why people are so angry and cynical. Well, it's because of these anti-democratic games that are being played. I don't expect the Labour Party in particular to have some kind of Damasian conversion to the cause of independence, but I would expect respect for Scottish democracy and Scottish voters. So I credit Paul Swinney for making suggestions, for being open to a conversation about how we can move forward on the constitutional question. I would say that the best time to have that particular debate was a decade ago, but I welcome that there are some in the Labour Party open to having it now. I will take Mr Hoy's intervention.
Mr Greer for taking that intervention. If he believes in democracy and giving voters a choice, why did the Scottish Green Party stand in so few constituencies?
Mr Hoy may have missed it, but the Scottish Greens gave every voter in Scotland the opportunity to vote for us, and far more of them chose to do so than chose to vote for the Scottish Conservative Party. As I said, Presiding Officer, I respect the arguments for the Union and against independence, but I can't respect the increasingly desperate ways that are being used to justify denying giving the people of Scotland a choice over our future. The Scottish Greens have always believed that independence is the best choice for Scotland, not as an end, but as a means to a greater end. It's our route back in to the European Union, to undo the incredible damage that Brexit has done and to regain our European citizenships. It would give us the power to tackle poverty through things like minimum wage laws. It would give us the full fiscal powers that we need to invest in the infrastructure that we really need to have thriving communities and a successful economy. It would give us power over our energy systems, where we can make the switch from an energy system, an energy regulation system that just maximises the profits of a handful of companies, and towards one that actually provides affordable energy for everyone. The independence movement of 2014 grew support for our cause by focusing on that vision, by focusing on what we can achieve with the powers of a normal nation. In the 12 years since, though, I've got to be honest, I do think that far too much of our focus as a movement has been on process rather than on the cause and that vision itself. And we know that much of this is in Westminster's hands. We believe that's wrong, but it is the reality. And we should focus on what we can change, and that's public opinion. There's currently a marginal lead for independence in the polls, but I think we can concede it is basically 50-50. And the best way... No. The best way to grow support for... no, Mr Kerr. The best way to grow support for Scottish self-government is to do self-government well, to maximise the use of the powers that we've got. That's the focus of today's Green Amendment. The powers of this Parliament are limited, but we have not yet exhausted them. In 2014, we grew support for independence by tying it to that sense of hope and optimism. I don't feel that there's a lot of hope and optimism in Scottish politics right now. There is a deep sense of frustration with our public services. We have a lot to be proud of from the era of devolution. This is the only part of the UK where child poverty is actually falling, for example. But too many reforms have been delayed and deferred, most obviously to the council tax. But in other areas, on housing, of course, if we had the borrowing powers of a normal nation, we could build far more. But what we can do right now is set standards to cut bills through energy efficiency for new builds in particular. We can use the rent control powers that this Parliament passed just a few months ago to help people save and keep a roof over their head. Our health service is crying out for reform, some of them major and structural, others very simple. People just want the services that they rely on every day to work. They just want someone to pick up the phone at their GP surgery when they call it. When it comes to our environment, there's no need to wait for independence to clean up our rivers and our lochs. And we can do all of these things to demonstrate that when decisions are made here, they benefit people and planet. We can grow support for full self-government through independence by maximising the use of the self-governing powers that we have right now. But we should also do it because it is the right thing to do here and now, regardless of constitutional objectives. And I want to close on that note, Presiding Officer, because of course there is a majority for independence in this Parliament, but there is not a single-party majority. Every progressive party in this Parliament has the opportunity to work together, to cooperate, to collaborate, to move Scotland forward on the areas that we do agree. The vast majority of members of this Parliament agree on the need for us to eradicate child poverty. A vast majority of the members of this Parliament agree on the need to take action to tackle the climate emergency. At the last election, as Gillian Mackay noted last week, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, the two opposition parties who did cooperate with the government to secure progress on the areas that we cared about, gained at that election. I think there's something for every party to learn from that. So the Greens will be proud to support the motion today. We will, of course, push for our amendment as well, because we believe in the cause of independence. We believe in putting Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. But we also believe that this Parliament has a duty to act here and now, to give our children the best possible future that they can, to help people save money on their bills, to lift families out of poverty and to tackle the climate emergency. This Parliament is more than capable of pursuing Scotland's constitutional future and taking action on the issues that affect people in their lives here and now. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, I'll just remind members who wish to speak in this debate to press their buttons. Not everyone has so far. I now call on Russell Finlay to speak to and move Amendment 105.2. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, President Officer. I begin by moving the amendment in my name about our ambitions for Scotland. So here we go again, the first debate of the new parliamentary term. But it's not about the NHS, with patients stuck waiting for years in misery and agony. It's not about education, with pupils told to accept mediocrity and classroom violence. It's not about Scots being forced to pay more and more tax to bankroll the SNP's out-of-control benefits bill. Nor is it about the betrayal of Scotland's oil and gas workers by two governments, SNP and Labour. And it's not about any of these important issues, because John Swinney, of course, only believes in one thing: breaking up the United Kingdom. He's holding Scotland back, stuck in the grip of constitutional paralysis. His party is not actually interested in improving people's lives or fixing the public services that they broke. For them, that's too much like hard work. And of course, the SNP will never be honest about the financial cost of independence. If they ever got their way, Scotland would face a funding gap of £26 billion.
Shocking. Scots
would face extreme tax rises, while public services would be cut to the bone. Presiding Officer, the timing of today's debate is comical. Today, of all days, John Swinney is banging the independence drum, when the news agenda is dominated by his party stealing money from their own members and supporters. Money the SNP promised to ring-fence for independence. And here we are, just 24 hours after Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrow, admitted using over £400,000 of stolen money to fund their lavish lifestyle. Presiding Officer, in 2021, John Swinney went onto the BBC and publicly dismissed valid concerns about the SNP's finances. Nicola Sturgeon also told those with concerns to stay quiet. And when questioned by police, she repeatedly said, "No comment." The tactics of organised crime. And today, John Swinney, today of all days, John Swinney reckons the SNP can be trusted to take full control of an independent Scotland and our nation's finances. The same John Swinney who didn't have a clue that his childhood friend, who he appointed SNP Chief Executive, was plundering their own party. You would need to have a heart of stone not to laugh. The painful lack of self-awareness on the SNP benches. Does John Swinney not see how this sounds to people who despair at what this Parliament has become? The sad truth is, Presiding Officer, that John Swinney is never, ever going to change. We shouldn't hope for any change at all. but the Scottish Conservatives will always stand up to and call out this nonsense. In 2014, the people of Scotland said, no, John Swinney's never respected their vote. He should know the law is clear. The Parliament does not have the power to hold a referendum. Nicola Sturgeon went to court on this. She spent hundreds of thousands of pounds, taxpayers' money this time, and she lost. And in the most recent Scottish election, more voters backed unionist parties than those supporting separation. Yet none of these facts matter to John Swinney and the SNP. Presiding Officer, I've recently spent time in Aberdeen along with our UK party leader, Kenny Badenoch, and we see the damage being inflicted in Scotland's oil and gas sector, with thousands of jobs being lost. Labour don't care. They remain against new drilling. So here's my challenge to John Swinney today. His party still has a presumption against new oil and gas licences. So let's send a message of support to the oil and gas workers, a call to action, end the SNP's opposition, get Britain drilling again, and drop the damaging independence obsession.
Thank you. I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton to speak to and move Amendment 105.1.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Members will be delighted to hear I don't plan to take all of my time this afternoon. I intend to cede some of it to Duncan Dunlop, who will be making his first speech later this afternoon. But in the time that I do have, can I remind the Chamber that debates like this used to be marquee occasions. There were times when the galleries would be full, the press gallery absolutely stuffed, and even the cameras of the world trained on this Parliament, because the question of Scotland's future in the Union was so unpredictable at that point. But there is a muscle memory now, a performative element to debates like this, because a Section 30 will be requested this afternoon, Presiding Officer. A Section 30 will be requested and it will be declined. Why? Because John Swinney manifestly failed in the test that he set himself just a month ago. He said on the 28th of April, and he couldn't have been clearer, I am saying, and I quote this from the Scotsman, I am saying that we need to make sure the SNP get a majority to make sure that we can take forward an independence referendum. Presiding Officer, 59% of the general public, the voting public, disagreed with that assertion and voted for parties in this chamber who did not back a second referendum. It is only because the vagaries of our voting system, the gaming of the system by the parties of independence, that we are now in this situation. I will briefly take an intervention from Ross Greer.
I remember in the last session of this Parliament where we pointed out that the pro-independence parties had won not just a majority of seats but had won a majority of votes, and Mr Cole-Hamilton had to come up with a whole new reason against a mandate for a referendum at that point. So why do the goalposts keep shifting?
Presiding Officer, Ross Greer is celebrated as one of the brightest members of this Parliament, yet basic arithmetic seems to be escaping him. 59% of the public is bigger than 41%. I think he should consult his maths teacher. And as such, because they have failed in this effort, that is now a covenant that the First Minister tried to establish with the people, which must be set aside, because a Section 30 order is not going to build a new hospital in Shetland. 18 months of campaigning around the Constitution is not going to duel the lethal A9 any faster. Identifying offices for embassies and high commissions overseas for a future independent Scotland is going to do nothing to reduce child poverty. And the interminable debates about what currency an independent Scotland would or would not adopt are going to do nothing to instruct an independent review that is so vitally needed for maternity services in the far north of Scotland. In all truth, Presiding Officer, we have never, as a chamber, since the SNP came to power, fully flexed the muscles of devolution, fully flexed one of the most empowered, devolved nations in this world to address the things that all of our constituents have decidedly sent us to Parliament to discuss. On the cost of living emergency, I'll give him his credit. The First Minister did touch on the cost of living emergency. This was a cost of living election, but nothing about 18 months of debate around the Constitution is going to make people's homes warmer by instructing that emergency programme of home insulation that we need. It's not going to address the crisis in our social care system, which is keeping 2,000 Scots in hospital who neither need nor want to be there but can't get home for want of a social care package. It's not going to lift up education, and it's not going to... I don't have time. And it's not going to...
You do have time.
OK. I'll take an intervention from
Nick. Oh.
Giving way. One of the fundamental challenges we face in social care is the recruitment and retention of workforce. And that is a particular conspicuous challenge in our Highlands and rural communities. Is that not a convincing argument for powers over immigration to be devolved to this Parliament?
I do not disagree with Mr Arthur that Brexit's been a disaster for social care, but it would be a lot easier to fix social care if his government paid people more to work in it, or gave them key worker housing that addressed the shortage of housing in the Highlands and Islands that he discussed. So he's got a nerve to raise that with him. And we need to get Scotland moving again, presiding officer. Just last week, this nation was embarrassed when the technology of the 19th century came to the aid of passengers of the 21st century, because the Clyde paddle steamer, the Waverley, had to rescue passengers because of a Calmac vessel broken down. This is a microcosm of the inadequacies of this SNP government. Taking time for parliamentary debates like this does nothing to serve our constituents. No wonder they do not have the attention or the trust in this Parliament that they used to, because they just don't believe that they can deliver for it.
Thank you. And I now call on Malcolm Offord. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So, here we go again. Welcome back to Groundhog Day. Doesn't the SNP just love debating matters which are reserved to Westminster instead of doing the day job? Is there any wonder why 2 million Scots did not vote in this election? We'll start again. Is there any wonder why 2 million Scots did not vote in the election on 7th of May? Presiding Officer, Holyrood controls 60% of the spending in Scotland. Moreover, control over devolved matters in this chamber controls 80% of daily life in Scotland. Our schools, our hospitals, our roads, our policing, our communities. That is what hard-working Scots want this Parliament to focus on, how to build prosperity for families and communities. No endless debates on this never-ending question. So why does the SNP indulge itself by continually debating matters reserved to Westminster? And, Presiding Officer, we all know why. It's something called a deflection strategy, because they don't want to focus on the track record of what they've done in their day job, the fact that our economy is anaemic and promotes welfare over work, the fact our taxes are too high and provide a disincentive to productivity, the fact our planning is so bad that SMEs are shutting down, the fact that in healthcare 93% of Scots say that it needs reform, the fact that in education our schools have gone from outstanding to average with the attainment gap widening, the fact that in jobs and skills we have 750,000 adult Scots not working, yet we bring in 300 welders from the Philippines to work in our shipyards, the fact that community cohesion is breaking down in our most vulnerable communities. That is why 2 million Scots did not vote. There's no point, is there? Because nothing changes. All we get is managed decline and mid-table mediocrity, scunnered by the SNP. Never their fault, always victims. Well, let's turn to this motion about Indy Ref 2. The First Minister asked a question, is the UK a voluntary union? There's never been any doubt about that being a voluntary union. Margaret Thatcher made it very clear to Alex Salmond that the UK was a voluntary union. She said to him she didn't want the UK to break up, but if he delivered that there was a democratic mandate for the Scottish people to leave the UK, they can leave the UK. And the Tories have got themselves in a mess on this, because all they say is no, ever, always no to another referendum. Yes, sir. I'll give you the exact numbers on that, because that is a key point. That is an absolutely key point, and that's what we're going to come to in this discussion. Even in 2016, after the EU Brexit, the leader of the Tories, Ruth Davidson, said it was unconstitutional to say there will never, ever be another referendum. We can't sit in this chamber and say there will never, ever be another referendum. But we can say in this chamber that right now there's no appetite for the Scottish people to have such a thing. And we should at least be saying to ourselves that for at least 10 years we should not be talking about this, because this Parliament should focus right now on devolved matters to make Scotland the most successful part of the UK. Yes, I'll take the intervention.
I thank Lord Alford for giving way. In this chamber, he promised the smack of firm opposition. So why is there no reform amendment to this woeful SNP motion?
The answer to that question, Mr Hoy, is we don't believe we should be debating this matter. We don't believe. We don't. This is a Can I continue? The Constitution is a reserved matter to Westminster. We should not even be discussing this today, hence there's no amendment. Now, the Tories do...
OK, you made your point.
The Tories have said they do like to call me some sort of closet nationalist. I accept that. And they say Reform UK has got members in it who previously supported independence. I mean, to clarify, I would align myself with John Buchan, who was a Conservative MP. And he said 100 years ago, speaking in the House of Commons in 1932, John Buchan said that every Scot should be a Scottish nationalist. But he went on further, he said it can be proved, if it can be proved, that a separate Scottish Parliament was desirable. That is to say, the merits were greater than the disadvantages and dangers, Scots should support it. Now, my view on this is that he was not advocating Scottish independence, as you're discussing today, but he was a unionist nationalist. And that's how I'd align myself, strongly Scottish in identity and culture, but committed to the United Kingdom, which is the best place for us to build a prosperity. He argued that preserving Scotland's national character within the Union rather than actually dissolving the Union itself. So that is my position. The question is, what is the SNP position? Presiding Officer, it's become increasingly clear to me that the SNP's position on independence, they don't actually want it. Because if they did, they would have spent the last 12 years actually preparing Scotland to become independent. They would have spent the last 12 years answering the questions they couldn't answer in 2014, like currency, like how do you borrow money without a credit card, pretty basic, like deficit, how do you join the EU when you're only allowed a 4% deficit and they've got a 12% deficit? Yes, I'll give way.
I certainly look forward to never hearing Reform MSPs speak about reserved matters in this Parliament, but I'm very keen that the member answers the earlier question about if this is a voluntary union, how does Scotland leave? So
that's very nicely leading me exactly to that point. So currency, no answer. Deficit, 12% deficit where the EU needs a 3%, no answer. A hard border with England where 60% of our exports in Scotland go to England. Pensions, where Scottish pensioners are greatly protected by the umbrella of 65 million rather than 5 million contributors. And defence, where we've got Russian subs circling Scotland right now. So I would say to this, I would say the Scottish National Party that Alex Salmond actually did a pretty admirable job to move the independence movement from 30% to 45%. And I would argue that when he passed the baton to Nicola Sturgeon, he was entitled to think she and John Swinney would move it from 45 to 60%. But what's actually happened, and to answer the question on the two interventions? Polling in 2014 in Scots who voted for the separatist parties was 1.4 million Scots. In 2021, Holyrood, that number was 1.3 million Scots. And in last 3 weeks ago, on the 7th of May, that number was 1 million Scots voted for separatist parties. That is less than a quarter of the electorate voting for separation. How can that ever be considered a mandate to break up the UK? To quote the First Minister, how can that be presented as compelling and demonstrable evidence that Scots want to separate from the UK? I don't see it myself. I'm just going to finish with this little anecdote. When I was a Scotland Office Minister, I went to the Arctic Assembly in Iceland, and my job was to shadow Air Miles Angus Robertson to every meeting he went into. I had to go in afterwards as he ran around the world telling everyone how monstrous Westminster was and wouldn't let Scotland go. The Icelandic Prime Minister said to me, Mr Robertson's just been in and complained about you being nasty to him and not letting Scotland have independence. And I said, look, in my reckoning, Norway went independent in 1905, and they had a 96% vote in favour. She said, yes. I said, you in Iceland, you went independent in 1944, and you had a 98% vote in favour of independence. I said, well, we had a vote in 2014, and only 45% of people voted for independence. She said, it's difficult enough to launch an independent country with 96%, but you can't do it with 45%. The fact is, the majority of Scots do not favour separation. And this debate is just a 5-year rolling performative ritual. And I would say the SNP have only got themselves to blame for this. I think in the future they'll look back in the last 25 years of government and wonder why on earth they didn't actually advance the cause by making Scotland Indy ready. Instead, all they ever did was talk and blame Westminster. Same old SNP, always victims.
Thank you. We now move to the open part of the debate. I have to say that the first 8 speakers are all making their maiden speeches, and therefore there will be no interventions. Whoever is in the chair will be reminding members of that as we progress. And the first person to speak in the open debate will be Kate Campbell, a generous 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to thank the voters of Edinburgh Eastern, Musselburgh and Trinent, this wonderful, diverse constituency that represents so much of modern Scotland, from our beaches to our castles, our harbour to our university. Urban communities within the capital city stretching to rural villages, large new build estates, modern industrial estates, commuters, farmers, former mining and fishing communities, affluent communities and communities that are struggling with poverty. And I want to thank all of these communities because every single one of them voted with optimism. They voted for positive policies to make life better. They did not vote for a negative, to stop something or to blame others. They voted with hope for Scotland's future, and I will carry the expectation of that hope with me for the next 5 years. And this week, the Scottish Government is getting stuck in to delivering on those promises that were made during the election campaign. Expanding childcare, improving the NHS, tackling the cost of living crisis. And today, we are calling for the Section 30 order to transfer the powers to hold the independence referendum that the people of Scotland voted for a couple of weeks ago. We have the highest number of pro-independence MSPs this Parliament has ever seen, and today a majority of MSPs will call for that Section 30 order. And if the Unionist parties want to call this a voluntary union and say that we are a functioning democracy, then they too must support the transfer of those powers so the people of Scotland can choose their own future, because that is what they voted for. And of course they did, Presiding Officer, because Westminster is not working. In my lifetime, we've seen Thatcher decimating public services, asset stripping the common good. Then we had Blair saddling us with PFI debt, taking us into illegal wars, and during a period of economic prosperity, squandering the opportunity to tackle structural inequality. Then we had the Tories and Lib Dems hand in hand, ushering in an age of austerity, allowing our infrastructure to deteriorate and our people to suffer. Then the Brexit that we did not vote for, stifling Scottish businesses, damaging trade, pushing up the cost of goods for us all. No serious plan to deal with Putin's war in Ukraine or the aftermath of the pandemic. Just Boris, his bluster, the most deeply unserious Prime Minister the UK had ever seen until we had Liz Truss. Taking a wild gamble, skyrocketing government borrowing costs and skyrocketing mortgage costs for ordinary people who were already suffering. And now we have a Labour government absolutely paralysed with fear to do anything, clinging to power for power's sake, a technocratic regime with no vision, no ambition and no sense of mission to make life better for the people who need it the most, lacking in leadership as Trump derails the global economy, instead descending into internal psychodrama when the people need them the most. And looming on the horizon, we have Farage, best friend of the billionaires, who wants to privatise the NHS and who wants to blame migrants for the cost of living. Well, let's put on the record today, Presiding Officer, it is not migrants who've created the cost of living crisis. It is successive failure. It is the successive failure of UK government after UK government. Westminster has not worked for the people of Scotland for a very long time. And when others talk about voters being scunnered, that is why, decade after decade after decade of abject failure by Westminster to respond to the needs of the people. And it is for those who've lodged amendments against the Section 30 order to defend that record, but they won't. Why? Because they can't, because it is indefensible. And instead they will talk about an amorphous concept of change and pretend that devolved powers are enough. But the truth is that the people do not trust the parties of Westminster, because the people do not trust the institution of Westminster. People look around and they know that our society needs to fundamentally change, and the movers of those amendments from the unionist parties, they need to justify why they think that things should stay the same, because that is not what people voted for. People voted to have the opportunity to have their say on independence, because the people know, even if the unionist parties do not, that we need our independence. We need it in order to be able to tax the wealth of the multi-billionaires. We need it to be able to rejoin Europe, to fix our energy policy. We need independence to make fiscal choices about investing in our infrastructure, our people, our communities, to foster economic prosperity and to build wealth in those communities, to allow us to tackle inequality and to get rid of economically illiterate policies like the Labour government's hike on employer national insurance contributions, which is a tax on jobs when the economy is already under pressure. These are things that we just cannot do with devolved powers alone. So we hear time and time again that we need to get on with the day job. Well, this is the day job for the SNP, delivering the best that we possibly can for the people of Scotland. The SNP is ambitious for Scotland, not to patch things up, not to tinker at the edges with devolved power, but for the constitutional change that we fundamentally need to radically transform our country, delivering prosperity, equality and hope with the powers that can only come from being an independent nation. The majority of MSPs today call for those powers. I hope that all parties will recognise that democratic mandate.
I call Donald McKinnon for their first speech. 6 minutes. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is the privilege of my life to be elected to represent the islands that I love. I want to start by paying tribute to my predecessor, Alistair Allen, for his 19 years of dedicated service to na Helen and Nier. I would also like to thank... I would also like to thank all those who supported me to get here, those who voted for me, all the volunteers who knocked on doors for me, and not least our Scottish Labour MP, Torquil Crichton, who was by my side throughout the campaign. For the first time since 2005, our islands are represented by a Labour MP and a Labour MSP, a team working together for our islands. I am disappointed that the Government has tabled this motion and has made the first action of this new parliamentary session to talk about independence. I spoke to thousands of people across na Helen and Nier, from Battersea in the south to Ness in the north, during the election campaign. I can count on two hands the number of people who mentioned the Constitution to me on the doorstep. Now, that is not to say that all those people I spoke to do not support independence, and we should all be cautious about how we interpret the mandates that we have been given to be here. But it is about priorities. I'm here because the people that voted for me wanted change. They saw a Scottish Government and a Scottish Parliament that all too often weren't working for them, and changing that was their priority. I stood in the election because I was worried about the future of our islands. With the frightening population projections that cast doubt on the future sustainability of our communities, we are in a crisis, and there is much at stake. That's what I believe my constituents want me to focus on. Far too many people from my generation want to make their life back home, but they can't. A lack of access to housing, good jobs, childcare, declining public services and a transport system that isn't working are holding back the next generation. So I want to focus on how we solve access to housing, focus on how we grow our economy, not just here in the Central Belt, but across Scotland and in our islands, to provide the opportunities and the jobs of the future. Focus on how we can make childcare work in our islands. Focus on delivering good public services. All too often, people tell me that they feel like things are going backwards. That must change. And focus on delivering a transport system that actually works. Currently, islanders are faced with a ferry service that at times is barely functioning and eye-watering prices for flights. Last week, every single ferry route in the Western Isles was either disrupted or had a warning of potential disruption due to technical or operational issues. Islanders know that ferries won't always be able to sail. We know all about the weather and that ships break down, but we are well beyond acceptable levels of disruption. In the past fortnight, I've heard from constituents who couldn't get to hospital appointments, accommodation providers who are worried about the future of their businesses, and islanders who are simply at the end of their tether, trying to go about their daily lives. The islanders that I spoke to during the campaign want the priority of this Scottish Government to be delivering a ferry service that works for islanders, not talking about the Constitution. Now, we will no doubt hear many claims and maiden speeches over the coming weeks that members' constituencies are the most beautiful in the country. But of course they will all be wrong, because everyone knows that Nahelin and Yar is indeed the jewel in Scotland's crown. From our stunning beaches to our crofting townships, rugged hills and towering cliffs, there is nowhere quite like it. But what makes our islands really special is the people. I was born and raised in Arnall, a crofting township, and like many islanders, I had more than one job before coming here. I managed a community-owned estate, served my community as an on-call firefighter, while also crofting. That grounding in community is what I want to bring to debates in this Parliament. The place I have grown up in, worked in and served has shaped me. I care deeply about its future, and I am worried that if we don't get things right here, that future is in doubt. That matters for the survival of our Gaelic language, for our culture, and it should matter for all of Scotland. Crofting and community land ownership are both deeply political. Without the actions taken by the parliamentarians of the past, driven by the activism of people who came before me, the world I grew up in wouldn't have existed. So I will take every opportunity I can to stand up and raise my voice for the issues that matter to my constituents in this Parliament. This is what ambition for our islands and Scotland looks like.
I call Lloyd Melville for their first speech. I generous.
I couldn't hear that.
Up to 7.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. It is a privilege to make my first speech in this debate, and let me start, as others have done, by thanking my predecessors, Graham Day and, of course, the late Andrew Welsh, who are both formidable voices for their communities and for Scotland. As Angus South's MSP, it is a real honour to represent the beautiful, diverse communities that I know and love. My pledge is to always put my constituents' voices at the heart of everything I do in this place. Presiding Officer, this debate is about ambition, and ambition begins at home. Members may know that the Declaration of Arbroath was written and sealed in my constituency. It was a statement of Scotland's nationhood, but also of Scotland's confidence, the belief that this country had the right to determine our own future. This Parliament was an ambition once too, the ambition to bring power closer to home. People campaigned for it, argued for it, marched for it and voted for it. And now it is here, in the words of the late Winnie Ewing, a Parliament that we can build a dream on. Now, I have not known a Scotland without this place. That's a privilege for me, but it is also a responsibility to ensure that this Parliament lives up to the ambition of those who fought to bring it into being. Presiding Officer, when we talk about ambition, we so often talk about the destination, the Scotland that we want our children and our grandchildren to inherit. But ambition doesn't begin at the destination. It begins with bairns waking up for school, looking forward to another day of learning. It begins with parents working hard to give their family a better life. It begins with young people able to get to university without tens of thousands of pounds of debt. Our ambition for Scotland should match the talent, wealth and energy of Scotland itself. That means no longer accepting a system where our resources are abundant but our powers are limited, where our people are ambitious but our choices are constrained. The mandate given to this Parliament is not just to talk about ambition, it is to act on it, in people's lives, here and now. But a mandate is not just a number on a chart. It is not just a line in a motion. It is built from conversations, on doorsteps, on high streets, in schools, community halls and homes across the country. Over the last year, I spoke to thousands of people across Angus South. In our towns, villages and glens, I listened to people tell me about what they worry about, what they hope for and what they want Scotland to become. And what people told me was clear. They want a government that understands daily life, a government focused on improving it, a government with the ambition to match their own. And that is exactly what this SNP government will be. A government that understands that ambition is not a word and a motion. It is what people are trying to build at home, at work and in their communities. In the business able to grow, in the farm able to keep producing, in the family able to pay the bills, and in the young person who can look at Scotland and see a future as ambitious as them. That should not be beyond us. A country with our talent, our resources and our energy should be able to give its people security and opportunity. But, Presiding Officer, under Westminster, Scotland is too often left doing more with less, paying higher bills from our own energy, watching wealth leave our shores while communities are told to wait, forced to fit our ambition to choices made elsewhere. That cannot be as good as it gets for Scotland. That cannot be the limit of our ambitions for our country. Presiding Officer, independence is not just a slogan. It is the power to put Scotland's wealth to work for Scotland's people. And I ask this. Why is it that in a house in Glenisla, pensioners cannot heat their home in an energy-rich nation? Why is it that people in Arbroath can look out of their window at turbines in the North Sea and yet still face bills they cannot afford? Why is it that Scotland produces the power but too often sees the wealth flow elsewhere? The answer is not that Scotland doesn't have the resources or the skills or the ambition. The answer is that we are denied the power to use them. Our wealth is extracted, our workers are discarded, our people are told their wishes don't matter. Scotland can do better than this, and Scotland should not need permission to do better than this. And that is why we must have a fresh choice on independence. Not because of identity, history, or just for its own sake, but to improve the lives of the people who live here. And that is what this debate is about. Power with a purpose. The power to build a Scotland where, in the words of Hamish Henderson, "Are the bairns at Adam can find breed, barley brie and painted room." But not just poetry, a promise. A promise that Scotland's wealth will serve everyone who makes Scotland their home. A promise that no one is held back by poverty, insecurity or decisions made elsewhere. A promise that this country can become what every good home should be, a place of safety, dignity, opportunity and hope. Living well with our neighbours on these, our shared islands. Members, that is the ambition that we carry, and that is the future we must deliver. Thank you very much.
I call for their first speech, Patricia Gibson.
Thank you. I am delighted to be called to deliver my first speech in our national parliament, and how fitting it is on this very issue which brought me into politics in the first place. Ambition for Scotland, and the very normal and simple principle that the people of Scotland are the only people who should make decisions about the country in which they live. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Ruth Maguire. She served in this place for 10 years, a truly kind and thoughtful person of whom I am very fond. And I wish her well and extend my best wishes to her husband Peter and her beloved girls as she begins the next chapter of her future. I stand here with the honour of representing the constituency of Cunningham South, a constituency comprising the towns of Irvine, Kilwinning, Stevenston, Stewarton and Dunlop. The largest population centre in this constituency is Irvine, with a population of around 34,000 people. It is the birthplace of not one, but two former First Ministers of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon and Jack McConnell. A town where Robert Burns worked and now has two streets named after him, Burns Street and Burns Crescent. The town of Kilwinning, known as the Crossroads of Ayrshire, dates back to the 600s, boasts a rich heritage famous for its archery in medieval times, and is tied to the ancient Kilwinning Abbey. It's also the birthplace of world-renowned composer Sir James Macmillan and Booker Prize nominee Andrew O'Hagan and celebrated author Janice Galloway. Stevenston is also a town which boasts links with Scotland's national bard, birthplace of Miss Leslie Bailey, whom Robert Burns met in 1792, with whom he was quite taken. A memorial stands to Bonnie Leslie in the town to this very day. Moving from north to east, Stewarton is a thriving town dating back to the 12th century, where Robert Burns' uncle helped guard the Stewarton Lay Church graveyard against body snatchers. And last, but by no means least, is the picturesque town of Dunlop, famed for its cheese, the Ayrshire cow breed and the beautiful Dunlop Parish Church dating back 400 years. And that is the diverse range of towns I now have the honour to represent. As for the motion before us, the election a couple of weeks ago indicated that the Scottish public have placed their trust in parties that fully support an independent Scotland. This is the most pro-independent Parliament we have ever known. And independence is a normal state of affairs, and it will serve Scotland as a means to fully realising her ambitions. It is the means through which we can build the fairer, more compassionate, more just Scotland we all want to see. The reality is that unless we are unshackled from a failing Westminster system, decisions will not be made in the best interests of the people of Scotland. For example, Scotland has the energy, but we do not have the power. As a result, Scotland's energy wealth has flowed to the London Treasury, whilst in Scotland we pay some of the highest energy bills in Europe, and that is not good enough. Scotland needs the power to harness her own resources for the benefit of the people of Scotland. Since the dawn of devolution, we have come so far. Free university tuition based on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. Expanding childcare, free prescriptions, minimum unit pricing, making inroads and tackling child poverty through the Scottish Child Payment and other measures. But there is so much more to do to improve the lives of the people of Scotland. And the ambition for Scotland on the SNP benches knows no limits and can be delivered as a fully fledged independent Scottish nation. We know that other small independent nations can thrive and prosper, yet no other small independent nation has the vast resources that we have in energy-rich Scotland. In energy terms, Scotland has hit the jackpot. For Scotland, as an independent nation, the sky truly is the limit. Moreover, let's not forget, Scotland has 1/3 of Britain's landmass, half its territorial waters, over 60% of UK fishing zones, 98% of oil reserves, 63% of natural gas, 1/4 of Europe's offshore wind resources and 90% of the UK's fresh water. To be honest, if I was a member of the UK Westminster establishment, I wouldn't want Scotland to leave the Union either. But this must be a matter for the people of Scotland. It is time for us to break the constitutional logjam and give the people of Scotland the right to determine their own future. Democracy is not an event. It is a process, and it is a process in which the people of Scotland have a sovereign right to assert their views. Those advocating for the union have repeatedly failed to articulate what the route out of this union is, because they cannot. Their arguments are exhausted, and all they have left is stonewalling and attempts to trap Scotland in a union that simply does not work for Scotland. Opponents of independence seem to pretend not to realise or understand that independence is a means to pursue the highest ambitions for Scotland. They argue that instead we should focus on issues like the cost of living, but we do. But what those supporting the union are really asking us to do is to continue to tackle the big challenges facing Scotland with one hand tied behind our back in order to appease vested interests, and we will not do so. It is time to put Scotland's future in Scotland's hands, where decisions are made in Scotland for the people of Scotland, and that is why this motion seeks to devolve powers to consult with the people of Scotland on this vital issue. Then we can truly unleash Scotland's potential as an independent country to better support and improve the lives of all our people.
I call Senga Beresford for their first speech, to be followed by Alex Kerr. A generous 6 minutes.
Thank you. I give my biggest thanks to all the Reform voters in the south of Scotland who have given me the opportunity to stand here today. I am a mother of 4, a small business owner, and I'm from Dumfries. And I'm here in this chamber today not because I have a political ambition, but because I grew sick of watching my beloved country be failed by a procession of incompetent SNP governments and equally incompetent opposition. It was the country's declining education system that really opened my eyes. My own children range in age from 32 to 13, so I've seen such failures firsthand. Spelling no longer matters. We don't bother to mark pupils before they sit their first exams at 15, and we have taken away any element of competitiveness. Because of this, my 2 youngest children travel across the border on a daily basis to a school with a better education. I do wonder if the First Minister would have them show their passports on this trip. At a time when people across Scotland are worried about their failing public services, I find it astonishing that the Government has once again chosen to drag a chamber that is meant to be focused on delivering for the people into this divisive constitutional debate. People did not send us here to endlessly rehash the arguments of the past. They sent us here to deal with the problems of the present. Our NHS is under enormous strain. Expectant mothers in Stranraer, which is my region, need to travel 75 miles to reach the nearest maternity unit after the Galloway Community Hospital maternity wing was shut down. A constituent even told me that his mother was sent to Liverpool for an operation because our services are so backlogged this side of the border. It seems the SNP want to throw stones at the UK, but are all too happy to accept Westminster's help when their failings are becoming too extreme. Small businesses are being crushed, and the hospitality sector sees restaurants and pubs closing daily. These are not just opposition talking points, these are the lived realities of people across Scotland. The people that this government are tasked to protect, yet instead of focusing on fixing the problems they created, they want to spend parliamentary time debating independence. Why? Because constitutional grievance is easier than government responsibility. You see, this government wants to distract and subvert so that it does not need to answer for its abysmal record. Let us remember what they told the Scottish people. If they secured a majority, they would claim a mandate for another independence referendum. Well, the Scottish people have gave their verdict, and they did not give this government a majority. Not only did they fail to secure that mandate, but over 60% of voters voted against them. And that matters. In a democracy, mandates cannot simply be invented after the fact because a government dislikes the outcome. If this government respected the will of the people, they would recognise that voters are exhausted by constitutional obsession and want this Parliament to focus on the day job. And frankly, after 2 decades in office, this government should have enough confidence in its own domestic record to defend it. But instead, every time pressure builds and standards fall, we see the same playbook rolled out once again. Change the subject, reignite division and whine about the Constitution. Well, I think Scotland deserves better than permanent campaigning. People want competent government. They want outcomes, not distractions. Leadership is about priorities, and the Scottish people made their priorities clear with the majority voting against separation, against division and against expensive referendums during a cost of living crisis. So in closing, I say to the Government, stop focusing on the politics of division and start focusing on the responsibilities of government. And on behalf of the 62% of people who voted against you, just do your job and stop wasting everybody's time. Thank you.
I call Senga Beresford. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. I call Alex Kerr to be followed by Michelle Campbell. A generous 7.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I feel so incredibly grateful to be able to stand here and represent the people of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse in our nation's Parliament. During the campaign, I travelled the length and breadth of the constituency. We spoke to people in every community. In Hamilton, Dalserf, Quarter, Fairnagare, Netherburn, Ashgill, Larkhall and Stonehouse. It is an honour to represent such a diverse constituency, from the rural villages reaching to the Clyde Valley to the populous towns of Hamilton and Larkhall, an area with a rich tapestry, from the history of Châtellerault to the being at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. I want to assure those people that the privilege they have given me to serve as their MSP is not one I will ever take for granted. I also want to thank David Russell for the work he has done for constituents in his time as an MSP. I know he was focused on helping those in need and how grateful those people were for his assistance. We in the SNP ran a campaign focused on hope. Hope for a better future for Scotland as an independent country back in the European family of nations. While other parties spoke about how they would stop the SNP, we focused on telling the people of Scotland how independence and an SNP government would make their lives better. The public considered our message, and they sent the SNP back to this place as the governing party of Scotland for a historic 5th term on 38.2% of the constituency vote. A considerably more convincing result than the 33.7% that Labour returned in the general election in 2024, or the 36.9% the Tories returned in 2015. Due to the UK's first past-the-post electoral system, both of these results returned unrepresentative majorities. And whether it was Brexit or scrapping the winter fuel payment, no one claimed their vote share delegitimised the manifesto they ran on to be elected. It is one of the most basic tenets of democracy that if a party wins an election, it should be able to implement its manifesto. Yes. The Scottish people have now elected the largest ever pro-independence majority to this Parliament. And fundamentally, it must not be forgotten that a request for a Section 30 order is not actually a request for independence. It is simply a request for the power to allow the people of Scotland to have a democratic say in their future. Such a short-sighted rejection from the Unionist Party is an admission of weakness from those in favour of preserving the last vestiges of an imperial project that is long past its sell-by date. Because, Deputy Presiding Officer, if they were confident in the strength of their conviction, if they were sure of the economic strength of their arguments, if they were sure of remaining shackled to an increasingly economic and politically isolated Brexit Britain, if they believed that the people of Scotland were with them, why then would they fear giving them a say on their future? We only ask for the right to decide. The people of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse have put me here with the purpose of demanding that right to be respected. The people of Scotland, by sending the largest group of pro-independence MSPs to this Parliament, are demanding that right is respected. Because people have had enough of Westminster decisions making their lives worse. Despite every council area in Scotland voting to remain in the EU, we were dragged out against our will, because it was in the interests of the Palace of Westminster and the British state. In the end, that is the only interest that really matters to this broken political system. As a result of sacrificing the interests of communities across Scotland, what has happened? Food inflation compared to countries on the continent is up. The cost of energy compared to countries on the continent is up. Economic growth compared to countries on the continent is down. If we'd been independent, we could have protected our strategic resources, like the refinery at Grangemouth, which had been a crucial refiner of jet fuel, which is now in short supply across the globe. Instead, Anna Sarwar promised the folk at the refinery their jobs would be saved, before the UK Labour Prime Minister sacrificed the workers at Grangemouth to allow them to save steelworks in England for the national interest of the Palace at Westminster. In short, our people have been left significantly poorer both in our living standards, our economy and international standing. The question is no longer whether Scotland can afford to be an independent country. The question is how much longer Scotland can afford to be shackled to this increasingly damaging and dysfunctional political union. The British political system is broken. The old ways are being swept away, and something new must rise to replace them. The Welsh and the Northern Irish can see it too, having elected pro-independence First Ministers. For the first time ever, every devolved nation is led by parties which believe in a partnership of equal independent nations. I firmly believe it is the only way to deliver the brighter future that our communities expect. And what is best for our communities will always be at the heart of what I do. I had the privilege to work for Christina McKelvey, who represented the constituency I now represent since its establishment for 3 terms. And her dedication to our communities, to serving the public and to standing up for what you believe in, no matter the costs, are things I will spend the rest of my days trying to emulate. And as a Democrat, I am comfortable that the voters I represent will have the say on whether I succeeded. Because we should never fear the judgment of the public. And that's perhaps a lesson for the opposition benches. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I call Michelle Campbell to be followed by Kayleigh Kinross O'Neill. Up to 7.5 minutes. Ms Campbell.
Presiding Officer, let me begin by congratulating you and fellow presiding officers on your new roles. I wish you all the very best as you guide this Parliament through the years ahead. As the newly elected member for the newly formed constituency of Renfrewshire North and Cardonald, I stand here deeply proud and genuinely honoured. I want to take a moment to thank my predecessors whose service helped shape the communities I now represent. Former First Minister Humza Yousaf, now part of the Cardonald addition to the constituency, and Natalie Dawn Innes in Renfrewshire North. Both have given years of commitment and care to their constituents. I thank them sincerely and wish them well for the future. Renfrewshire North and Cardonald is a constituency of remarkable diversity, from Langbank on the Clyde through Bishopton, Erskine and Shinnon, Renfrew and on to Penally, Cardonald and North Pollock. I will not be walking that one in any time soon, but I will be making my way around those communities to make sure that they know that they have representation that matters to them. Each community has its own identity, its own strengths, its own aspirations. Having represented Erskine and Shinnon in my role as a councillor, I am incredibly proud of what we have achieved as part of a strong SNP administration in Renfrewshire Council. I will continue to work collaboratively with councillors across the constituency to deliver the best possible outcomes for the people we serve. Presiding Officer, turning to the motion before us today. For over 20 years, I have served as a nurse in the Scottish NHS. It has been one of the greatest privileges of my life to stand with people in their most vulnerable moments, in life and in death. That experience shapes everything I believe about public service. It reinforces the responsibility on all of us to protect, support and invest into a modern NHS that can adapt and respond to the needs of our people. But we face a brutal reality. A Westminster government marching to the right, indifferent to Scotland's priorities and dismissive of Scotland's voice. Only with an SNP government have we been able to shield our NHS, our public services and our communities from the worst of Westminster's decisions. A government that has stood as a barrier between our people and the chaos created at Westminster. In my constituency, I'm proud to see the delivery of Glasgow's first GP-led walk-in clinic in Cardonald. Having knocked on many doors in the lead-up to the election, I know how important and welcome this investment is for so many, to offer diverse care and treatments on our communities' doorsteps. But even the best devolved government cannot protect Scotland from a Parliament that treats our mandate as optional, our resources as theirs to spend and our consent as irrelevant. This SNP Scottish Government's ambitious plans require long-term certainty to ensure stability. The kind of stability that allows us to invest confidently, plan strategically and build for future generations rather than firefight the consequences of decisions made elsewhere. Scotland cannot deliver this full potential while operating within a constitutional settlement where the rules can be rewritten at any moment, where progress can be stalled by a government Scotland did not vote for, or where our national priorities are too often treated as secondary. These ambitions demand the full powers of independence, not a system where Scotland's future is shaped by shifting political winds at Westminster rather than by the people who live and work here. Everyone has their own journey to yes. Mine was not inherited. I grew up in a family where support for the union was the natural position. In 2012, I was no. But by 2014, something changed. It was like a light switch. I voted yes, and from that moment, my conviction has only strengthened. I believe firmly and unapologetically that Scottish independence is the only path by which our nation can truly flourish. My previous work as for an MP in Westminster only reinforced that belief. I saw firsthand the sheer absurdity of trying to make progress within an institution that still clings to its own pomp and ceremony as if that alone imparts wisdom. An institution more interested in its own traditions, its hierarchy and its own self-importance than the people it was built to serve. Regardless of the injustice presented, regardless of the need, Westminster's instinct is always the same: protect Westminster. Scotland's interests are, at best, an afterthought and too often an inconvenience. We have lived the consequences of that attitude. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the European Union, yet we were taken out of it anyway. Our voice was not just ignored, it was dismissed. And when Scotland's Parliament, elected by the people of Scotland, sought the democratic right to hold a second independence referendum, that request was blocked. Not debated, not negotiated, blocked. If a union is truly voluntary, then the people within it must have the right to choose. If that right is withheld, then it is not a voluntary union at all. We see this contempt in the refusal to work constructively with a Scottish Government elected time and time again by the people of Scotland. We see it in the sneers, inflammatory language such as separatists, a term used to belittle legitimate democratic aspirations. We see it in the way Scotland's mandate is treated as optional, our resources as theirs to spend and our consent as irrelevant. But let me be clear. It is not the SNP nor the wider Yes movement that fuels division and hate. Scotland sees reality of the union on offer, and more than ever, Scotland is saying no more. No more suffering from decisions made by a government we did not choose. No more having our Parliament's hands tied behind its back. No more being made to feel lesser in our own nation. Scotland deserves better. Scotland is better. There is only one answer that makes sense, and that is the full autonomous decision-making of Scottish independence. Presiding officer, the people of Scotland have returned the largest pro-independence majority this Parliament has ever seen. That mandate is clear. This Parliament is at its best when it works together for a confident, fair, ambitious Scotland. That is the Scotland I believe in. That is the Scotland I will fight for, and that is the Scotland we can build with independence. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Kayleigh Kinross O'Neill making their first speech, to be followed by George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I just open by recognising what a huge privilege it is to speak for the first time in this chamber, not least on a debate about securing a positive future for Scotland, a fairer, greener and independent Scotland. I was born only a couple of months before the reconvening of the Scottish Parliament in 1999, and I don't say that to make some people feel a bit old, but to say that devolution and I have grown up together. I grew up, Presiding Officer, in your constituency of Motherwell, where the ghosts of cooling towers sit above hopeful regeneration, whilst thousands of families are still affected by job losses. They still struggle to this very day. I watched my own uncles, grandparents, family friends become shells of themselves, following years of under- and unemployment due to their livelihoods being pulled from under them. I didn't live through the Thatcher years, but I lived through the trauma, the uncertainty, the austerity and the anger that passes through generations in our communities. The failed Thatcherite experiments that still cause so much damage to those communities, from privatised bus networks to sewage polluting our natural environment. This needs to come to an end. Independence provides a very fresh start from all of this, a break from the past and an opportunity to build a better Scotland that works for all. Because of this, the vision of an independent Scotland has always struck a chord with me on a very personal level, and I know a lot of people my age feel the same way. So on a subject so important to me, I felt fitting that one of the first pieces of engagement I undertook, an Instagram story, with my new constituents should be on independence. I asked a range of folk for their thoughts, and this is what they said. Independence is equality, democracy, internationalism, solidarity. It is trust in making our own decisions and the freedom to make our own laws for ourselves. It is the power to be radical and make the change needed for people and for the planet. It is hope and choice, an opportunity to rejoin the European Union, hope that there may still be any alternative to all we're ever given. Now, I wasn't old enough to vote in 2014, but the result left me and so many of my generation feeling very helpless about our future. The same type of helplessness that was forced upon us by the Brexit vote. The truth is that when you live with the threat of your personal independence being taken away, it becomes painful seeing it happen to everyone in Scotland. As a disabled person, I know all too well what it's like to have people above you tell you what you are and aren't capable of. You're vilified by the media and the right-wing pundits to distract from the real greed and fraud that props up the systems. Our existence and authority are constantly under scrutiny. I'd like to bring these comparisons together and touch briefly on the social model of disability. A disability equality charity, Scope UK, states that the social model of disability is a way of viewing the world, a model that says people are disabled by barriers in society, not solely their impairment or condition. This counters the medical model way of thinking that focuses only on what a person currently has, instead of what they actually need. It creates low expectations and leads to people losing independence, choice and control in their lives. To bring what I'm saying a bit closer to home, until this term, for example, we could not have had a presiding officer in a wheelchair, not because members should have been expected to fix themselves or to sit aside and just assume that they would never be elected anyway, but because the steps to the chair were excluding equal opportunity. I am not disabled solely because of my illness, but because of the barriers that I face every single day. In healthcare, in moving around, in accessing support, in just trying to live my life like anybody else. So in that sense, Scotland has not been disabled by an inherent illness, but we are held back by the needless barriers that Westminster has erected and the arrogant presumption that they know better than we do as the people of Scotland. Following this election and throughout this parliamentary term, I am determined to see bold change. We cannot go on under the same pressure, disrespect and uncertainty. We must create a fresh start with independence, with the emphasis on that being the start of Scotland's progressive journey and not a final destination in itself. Presiding Officer, I know we cannot fix our inherent and systemic problems overnight, but with hope, honesty and respect, independence can and will be the real driver towards a better, greener future for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I call George Adam to be followed by Emma Roddick. Generous up to 7.5 minutes, Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's not often I hear something like that when I rise to speak in this chamber. But as one of the, I was going to say older members, but more experienced members of this chamber, I would say just listening to the first speeches from those across this and the tone from everyone in this, I hope we can keep that tone as we move forward and we have these important discussions like this debate here today. But firstly, I'd like to say, Presiding Officer, I'm glad to be back as Paisley's MSP, and someone's won the Paisley bingo already in the speech. But I'm reinvigorated to do the good work that we've got to do here because of the many conversations I had with the people in Paisley. Because you spend so much time in here, you sometimes get sucked into this world and you forget there is a real world out there with real people, with real problems and real issues. And that's one of the things that I've always tried to focus on when I've been representing the people of Paisley. But unfortunately, the opposition parties seem to have been, after last week, saying that we're going to be a wee bit more positive, found themselves right back in the same place they were before we all left, as if they're not learning any lessons for the absolute kicking that they got at the election. So the negativity oozes out of them when they're having debates like this, not telling us about what their plans are, what their ideas would be, what is the benefit of staying within the union. It's constantly just the negativity and the same old arguments, tired arguments that we've heard time and time again. Because, Presiding Officer, for me, this is not some abstract debate, constitutional argument. This is about people and it's about families. It's about the communities like mine in Paisley, and it's about the future we leave our children and those of us of a certain vintage, our grandchildren. Because when I think about independence, I don't talk first about flags or slogans or headlines. I think about the people I grew up with in Paisley, the families I represent now, the pensioners who are worried about heating bills, the parents trying to stretch every single pound to the end of the week, and the young people wondering if they will ever get the same opportunities that their parents had. That is what this debate is really about. For too long, decisions about Scotland have been made somewhere else. By governments Scotland did not vote for, pursuing priorities Scotland did not choose. And people who pay the price for all that are communities like mine in Paisley. We were told Brexit would strengthen the economy. Instead, it damaged businesses, pushed up prices and made life harder for ordinary families. Scotland rejected Brexit, but Scotland got Brexit anyway. We were told austerity was necessary. But what communities like mine saw was cuts to services, pressures on families and rising inequality. And all the while, Scotland remains one of the wealthiest countries in Europe, rich in energy, rich in talent, rich in innovation, yet too many people are struggling to get by. That cannot be right, Presiding Officer. And that is why I believe so strongly that the people who live in Scotland are best placed to make decisions for Scotland. Because when this Parliament has had the powers, we have used them to make different choices. We introduced free prescriptions, we expanded childcare, we protected university tuition, we introduced a Scottish child payment and helped drive down child poverty. These are not accidents, Presiding Officer. These are choices made, Scottish priorities with Scottish values. And imagine, just imagine, Presiding Officer, what we could do with the full powers of independence. Imagine an energy-rich country where no pensioner fears putting the heating on. Imagine an economy designed around Scotland's needs, not Westminster's political games. Imagine migration policies built to support our NHS and care services instead of damaging them. And imagine being back in Europe, looking outward again, giving opportunities back to our young people. As John Lennon said, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. All of this is not fantasy. Countries across Europe, countries the same size of Scotland or smaller, are already doing this. Nations like Denmark, Norway, Ireland, Finland are wealthier, fairer and more equal because they have the power to shape their own future. And I refuse to believe that people of Scotland are somehow less capable than people in those countries. We have everything we need to succeed. And, Presiding Officer, when I speak about independence, I speak about hope. Because politics without hope means absolutely nothing. I think about my own family. I think about children growing up in Paisley today, running through parks, going to our schools, dreaming about their future, about the world they can be part of and how they can change the world themselves. And I ask myself, what kind of country do we want to hand to them? Do we want them to inherit the chaos of Westminster politics, the endless cycle of austerity and division, Governments they do not elect making decisions against Scotland's interests, or do we want them to inherit a country confident enough to stand on its own feet? A country that believes in itself, a country where decisions are made here by the people who live and work here. Because independence is not about turning our backs on anyone. It's about taking responsibility for ourselves. It's about building a Scotland where prosperity is shared, where public services are protected, where opportunity is not determined by your postcode or your background. And in communities like mine in Paisley, that matters deeply. Paisley has always been a town built on resilience, built on hard work, built on community spirit. Through the highs, the hardships, our people have always looked after one another. That spirit, that belief in fairness, the dignity and opportunity is the very best of Scotland. And I believe independence gives us the chance to build a country that reflects those values fully. Not a perfect country overnight, nobody is pretending that, but a country with the powers to choose its own direction, to fix its own problems, to unlock its own enormous potential. And ultimately, Presiding Officer, this comes down to democracy. The people of Scotland have repeatedly elected pro-independence majorities to this Parliament. The principle should be simple. Scotland's future should be decided by the people who live in Scotland. No democracy should stop at the border. So let us have confidence in ourselves again. Let's believe in what Scotland can become, and let's build a future worthy of our children and grandchildren. A future where communities like mine in Paisley are not left behind, are not a statistic in some report, but are right at the heart of a fairer, wealthier and independent Scotland. Just imagine, Presiding Officer, what that future could be like.
Thank you. I call Emma Roddick to be followed by Craig Hoy. Generous 7.5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When I look at today's motion, I feel a deep sense of hope. Optimism for what we can do, and joy that yet again the people of Scotland have chosen to elect an SNP government which uses its time and its power in this place to tackle poverty and be ambitious, not just for those who are already well off and well placed to be successful, but for absolutely everybody that we represent. I joined the SNP because I'd never felt so much hope as I did during the 2014 referendum campaign. And it was the first time that I, as a young person growing up in an area of deprivation, attending a school that I was advised not to mention in job applications, felt that politics was something that I had a right to a view on, and felt like somebody was listening when I shared that view. I wasn't supposed to be here, something that I was reminded of by my Facebook memories the other day as a post from my younger self came up during the higher exams season, explaining my teachers' reactions when I announced that I was going to take up a job in politics instead of what they'd hoped I was going to do, which was become a musician or an engineer, respectively. But in learning about the arguments for and against independence, I gained true hope for a country where we made our own decisions, where the people that we elect to represent our communities in this place can make decisions about energy, employment, social security and so many other issues on which we're currently hamstrung. Hope for a country where young people's voices are heard, disabled people matter and pensioners get a deal that they really deserve. The kind of hope illustrated by Kayleigh Kinross-O'Neill as she so powerfully spoke earlier on about barriers. That's the hope that I want to give to all those who've become eligible to vote in the last decade, and to all those who did vote in 2014 but have since seen Brexit, COVID and every other difference between Scotland and the UK highlighted since we last got a chance to vote on the Constitution. I don't want those people to feel like I once felt, that this place and politics and having a view is not for them. When I knocked on doors over the last year, people told me that their priorities were the cost of living, transport, the NHS and housing. Independence came up now and again, but like me, their immediate priorities were cost of living, transport, NHS and housing. And like most people, I have never seen independence as an end in itself. It is a means to the end of allowing us to do better in all of those areas and more. We are doing everything that we can to eradicate poverty, to support those who need it most, and to create a country which is prosperous and responsible in meeting its global obligations and moral duties to tackle climate change and uphold human rights for everyone. Over the last 12 years, I have seen far too much progress held back, far too many decisions taken on our behalf against our wishes, and far too many people struggling who do not need to struggle. I agree with the Green Amendment that we have a clear majority, not just for independent supporting parties, but for progressive values. I'd like to mention that I felt very motivated today listening to some of our new members' first speeches, because that has been shining through. The contributions of Kate and Michelle, our new Campbells in particular, really had me feeling echoes of that 2014 campaign. People who have come here with purpose and a deep understanding of the why, not just the what, and an ability to convince. To convince people in the way that I was convinced in 2014, including the hundreds of thousands who, just as Craig Hoy didn't get to vote for the Greens, have not yet had the opportunity to vote on independence. We have to demonstrate that we can do better, and I'm confident that we will. But I'm clear that to do the best we can on all of the priorities our constituents have, all the events and crises that present themselves over the next 5 years and beyond, we need more power in this room. The suggestions in the weak unionist amendments that have come forward today won't even touch the sides. Many people have declared to me that they want to see more powers devolved to this Parliament. Not all of them are SNP. Not all are even close to convinced about independence. Labour in Scotland used to be amongst those people. Where are they now? In a similar debate last session, I pointed out to the Labour speakers who were claiming that all would be well once we had a Labour government, that governments don't last forever, and the Tories would be back in at some point. How things change. I don't necessarily think that's true anymore, but even worse, we have a Labour government which has failed to devolve more powers to this place, failed to join us in tackling child poverty, failed to even meet its own campaign commitments. It does not matter who is in power in London. Our voices are never heard strongly enough, and our people are never given the attention and the respect that they deserve. And all that Anas Sarwar and his colleagues can offer is that an ambitious future can and should be achieved through the devolved powers of this Parliament. Well, my ambitions are greater than that, and I think that Scotland should be too. This is not a voluntary union. If it were, the opposition in this chamber would be able to answer the simple question of how Scotland can leave it. It will be for them to explain after this debate to their constituents why they not only don't believe in independence, which it is their right to oppose as much as it's my right to support, but that their constituents shouldn't have a vote on it. That this Parliament should not have the power to put that question to the public, and that Scotland does not have a route to leave. That is what they must explain, and I don't envy them that. I am far more comfortable sitting in amongst my SNP colleagues calling for democracy, hope and a country with ambition that can be met. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Craig Hoy to be followed by Jackie Dunbar. A generous up to 6 minutes, Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I echo the comments of earlier to welcome you to your new role and to congratulate the Presiding Officers on their elections. And whilst this is not my maiden speech, can I also take this opportunity to pay tribute to my predecessor as MSP for Dumfriesshire. Oliver Mundell served the constituency with distinction. Now, there is a bitter irony in this chamber today that on the day after the former First Minister's husband was jailed for stealing the SNP's independence campaign funds, this First Minister is back seeking another independence referendum. And that is an irony that will not be lost on hard-working Scots. People who cannot believe that repeating an argument that the SNP lost fairly, squarely and decisively in 2014 can, even for one moment, be the #1 priority of Scotland's new government. In the recent election in the south of Scotland, it was the Scottish Conservatives and the Scottish Conservatives alone who stood up to the SNP and stood up for Scotland's place in our United Kingdom. And despite the First Minister's best efforts and those of his unwitting allies in reform, the vitally important blue wall remained resolutely in place. So convinced was John Swinney that he could break it, that he visited Dumfriesshire during a dash along the border just days before the election. So as I seek to increase my majority, Mr Swinney, can I invite you to attend my constituency as often as possible over the next 5 years? Because each and every time you raise the spectre of independence, my constituents are reminded of the reckless disregard that he has for their futures, the risks to their jobs, their pensions, their public services, their national security and their national identity. I will in a moment. And those risks remain very real for those living along the border. And had reform handed the SNP my seat, could you imagine pro-UK voters living in Gretna, looking their children and their grandchildren in the eye, and telling them that we put at risk their right to go forth into the world and profess themselves proud to be Scottish and proud to be British, with all the doors that opens and all the benefits that brings. But if it wasn't for the Scottish Conservatives preventing the SNP in those blue wall seats and denying the First Minister the majority that he craved, this is indeed the very dangerous place we could be in today. And I will take Emma Roddick's.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way. I've heard a few members on that side of the chamber today call for us to live in the present and not the past. So I'm curious why he's referring to arguments lost in 2014 rather than who won the election this month. And does he recognise that that referendum was 12 years ago, and that is as many MSPs as his party currently has? So is he really in a position to be claiming that we can't go back and ask people for their opinion again?
Such is the complacency of the member that she doesn't realise her party lost 400,000 votes over the last 5 years. And I knocked on 10,000 doorsteps. And let me say, not one person brought up independence. They brought up the state of the roads. They brought up the state of the health service. They brought up the powerless state of the SNP. They brought up corruption in the SNP. But never once did they bring up independence. So I make this appeal to John Swinney today. Why doesn't he ditch his constitutional obsession and fix the mess that the SNP has created and ignored over 19 wasted years? But in this chamber, we are the only authentic voice making this call, because Labour's Sir Keir Starmer is now so weak and so beleaguered that he is incapable of standing up to the SNP. And while Reform claim to be a unionist party, we know that they are weak on the future of the union. Reform promised to be the fox in the henhouse, and after today's contribution from Malcolm Offord, it is clear that the hens have nothing to fear. In fact, after that performance, Lord Offord, I think the hens are probably having a party. But Reform cannot be trusted on the future of the union. The Reform cannot be trusted on the future of the union. And take as Exhibit A the self-styled Sir David Kirkwood MSP sitting over my shoulder to the left. He remains committed to breaking up Britain. And if Mr Offord looks to the Reform benches, he will see a clutch of cranks and constitutional chameleons who are weak on Scotland's place in our United Kingdom. Presiding Officer, talking about cranks, I will take an intervention.
But I would say, considering the attacks that you're putting on us, do you think it's a bit hypocritical, and would you accept that, considering you stood a pro-independence candidate in Shettleston and accepted Lisa Cameron into your benches, it's a tad hypocritical trying to attack people? We're happy to have people who change their mind on independence. I just wish the Tories would do the same.
Craig Hoy.
I recall Thomas Kerr when he was supporting Penny Mordaunt and Jeremy Hunt before he reinvented himself as the Reform Genghis Khan that he is now. Now, fundamentally, Deputy Presiding Officer, it is a sorry state of affairs that this is the first substantive debate that we're having in this new Parliament. And if anyone beyond this Parliament is actually watching this debate, they will inevitably come to the same conclusion that I reached during the last parliamentary term, that this is a waste of space, First Minister, and this is a blatant waste of valuable
Mr Hoy,
time.
we have a point of order. David Kirkwood.
Thank you. Mr Hoy continues to spout the same rubbish that he did all through the campaign.
and continues to misrepresent
Mr Kirkwood, I appreciate you're a new member, but you need to cite which standing order that you're relying on. If you want to go away and look at the standing orders and come back, we can take you at that time. But I'll take Mr Hoy.
Thank you.
I was actually finished, Deputy Presiding Officer, but it does give me the opportunity to remind this Parliament that Mr Kirkwood did indeed support independence and continues to do so.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. And we're moving on to Jackie Dunbar, who has 7.5 minutes, but we do have time in hand.
Okay, thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I welcome you to your new role, and can I also add how delighted I am to be returned by the good folk of Aberdeen Donside to their Parliament to represent them. Today's debate is about ambitious for Scotland, and let me start with my simple, greatest ambition for our nation. It's an ambition I have had since I was a bairn, growing up on the farms across the northeast of Scotland where my dad worked. It's an ambition that grew from when I got my first job in a petrol station as a teenager and throughout the 14 years I worked for Tesco's. It's an ambition I wanted for my daughter's future, right from the very day she was born, and continued to grow as I was raising her. It's an ambition I fully saw the need for when I was a councillor representing some of the most deprived communities within Aberdeen. And it's an ambition I will do everything in my power to realise as a member of our Scottish Parliament. That ambition is for Scotland to be an independent country. Not just so that folk have a real and meaningful say in shaping and determining their own destinies, and those of their bairns and their bairns' bairns, but for the difference it will make when major decisions which have so much of an impact on folks' lives are taken in Scotland for Scotland. Right now, the need for that feels especially obvious in Aberdeen, where decisions taken in Westminster are having such a devastating impact on the city I represent. So let me take this opportunity to talk about Aberdeen and its future, how the SNP Scottish Government is supporting the city to be ambitious, and how the North East has been failed by successive UK governments. When I moved to Aberdeen as a young quine, it was already known as the oil capital of Europe. The industry reached into every community, and just about everyone had a family member or friend who worked on the rigs. For me, it was my long-suffering partner who would often go offshore, and today, decades later, it's my daughter who now goes offshore when needed for her work. Oil and gas, and now energy more generally, has defined Aberdeen throughout all of that time, and it has treated us well. Yes, there's been downturns, and sadly there have been tragedies, but for the most part, oil has meant prosperity for the North East of Scotland, and oil and energy have become a part of the city's identity. But oil is finite, and even before there was any suggestion of phasing out oil, and long before the windfall tax started forcing out oil companies, Sorry, I'll take an intervention from Rachel Hamilton.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Jackie Dunbar is very much in support of the oil and gas industry in the North East. Will she back our calls to drill for oil and jackdaw and open the fields of jackdaw and Rosebank for gas and oil?
Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I will address the drill, baby, drill mantra later on in my speech. There was an acknowledgement that we needed to start investing so that Aberdeen would continue to be prosperous after oil. I remember having those conversations as a councillor nearly 20 years ago, and the hope that we would see that investment made during prosperous times, so it was there to see us through when it was needed. Unfortunately, in those 20 years, we've seen the financial crisis, austerity, the oil price crash, the vote for Brexit, the pandemic, actually leaving the EU, and then when the oil price finally picked back up, the windfall tax was introduced, and with that, investment started moving elsewhere. Now, there's a lot of great work being done by the business community in the city to diversify our economy and to build us up as a hub for renewables, which has been supported by the Energy Transition Zone, by Aberdeen and Grampian Chambers of Commerce, by many others, and by the Scottish Government's £500 million Just Transition Fund. But so much of that work is being undermined by the Energy Profits Levy. So let me share some of my ambitions for Aberdeen. One of those ambitions is perhaps rather lofty. We'll take Mr.
Limper. I'm very grateful. Could the member confirm that the SNP not only wanted a higher energy profits levy without the investment allowances that the Conservatives brought in?
Jackie Dunbar.
That was history that we then went on. I'm actually surprised that it was the member from North East, Liam Kerr, that asked me a question and not his counterpart, but I can't see him there today. Maybe he's not getting on with the day job, but out trying to find another day job. One of those ambitions is perhaps rather lofty, which is for Aberdeen to become the net zero capital of the world. I'm never going to stop trying to push Aberdeen for that. Reaping the benefits of the well-paid jobs and strong local economy comes with that, and ensuring that our region sees a lasting legacy from North Sea oil. Other ambitions, I feel, are somewhat more humble, Presiding Officer. For example, in the energy capital of Europe, it is my ambition that nobody should be afraid to put the heating on because they're worried about their energy bills. And in a city which is surrounded by farms and fishermen, it's my ambition that no bairn should go to bed hungry. And all of which ties in with the Scottish Government's commitments to eradicate child poverty, build a more prosperous economy and help folk in the cost of living crisis, and to tackle climate change. And all of which has been undermined by the UK Government, whether that be Labour or Tory run. Let's start with the Tories, the party that introduced the windfall tax. Brought in under Boris Johnson and maintained throughout all of Liz Truss's and Rishi Sunak's premierships. The Energy's Profit Levy and the years of lost investment it led to is the Tories' legacy. And now they have the cheek to come out with drill, baby, drill. But even if drilling started again tomorrow, it's still only a short-term solution by itself. The Tories consistently fail to outline what comes next, let alone invest in it. And they are actively campaigning against investment in renewable energy and infrastructure, which will support the next generation of jobs. The biggest asset we have in Aberdeen is not oil and gas, or wind, or tidal. It's our workers. That innovative, pioneering, highly skilled, world-leading workforce. Those workers are what we need for our long-term prosperity, for whatever comes next. In the short term, yes, we should drill, baby, drill. But if we want lasting prosperity, then the focus needs to be on our workforce and on skills, baby, skills. Then we have Labour, who have increased and extended the windfall tax, not just now, Mr Kerr, who have increased and extended the windfall tax, and who now want to close down Aberdeen's biggest industry altogether while opening the doors to Russian oil. Thousands of energy workers are being portrayed by the Labour Party, regardless of who is in charge. The UK Government has failed to match the Just Transition Fund, failed to fully back the Acorn project, failed to fix the windfall tax, failed to invest in renewables, failed to invest in the North East, failed to support oil and gas workers, and failed to bring down energy bills. What can I say? The UK is a failing state. So let's be ambitious. Let's do better. Let's give ourselves and our country a fresh start with independence.
We're moving on to winding up speeches, and I would remind the Chamber that the convention is that for the first speech, no interventions should be made. Duncan Dunlop.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is my first speech. Time is limited, so with respect, thanks to everyone who got me here, the voters of the South of Scotland, my supporters and my predecessors. My ambitions for Scotland are slightly different to those who are concerned with the Constitution, Mine are inextricably linked to the future and aspirations of our care-experienced community. Those are our children and young people who spend time in our foster care system, residential care, kinship care, who are looked after at home, secure care and have been adopted. There are approximately 13,000 of these children and young people in care today. They are the responsibility of the state. I have worked with care-experienced people for the last 30 years. I've been an expert independent advisor to the New Zealand and UK government on care system reform and led the charity here for many years, called Who Cares Scotland. A good friend of mine is Tony MacDonald. He was a care-experienced young guy and spent most of his time, his childhood, in care. When he was 12 years old, he recalled wanting to go home and visit his mum. And so he went to the phone in the corridor of his children's home and called her. But Tony's mum had her own struggles. She said, "Nah, Tony, can't cope this weekend." Tony felt the pain of rejection. The shame that came with that is the most corrosive feeling of all that quickly turned to anger. He slammed down the phone and very quickly he was restrained by 3 adult members of staff, pinned to the ground with such force that they ruptured his gut on the doorstep. He was held there for 20 minutes. Tony would recall in later years, "How did they see me as a threat? I was a wee boy. I just wanted a cuddle. I wanted to be held, to be told I mattered and that I was loved." The state would go on to spend over £1 million not loving Tony through his childhood. And an unloved child can quite easily turn into an angry young man. Unfortunately, that's what happened to Tony. He would spend 3 months after his 16th birthday, he was sent to prison where he would spend most of the next 6 years. But there's hope. Tony's mum, remarkably, turned her life around, and she gave inspiration to Tony to do the same. And after he'd spent 18 months in rehab, I'm proud to say I employed him. And I employed many other care-experienced people too, like Tony, brilliant, inquisitive, intelligent young people who are born the same as any of us. They have the right to claim and expect to be claimed and loved. And many remarkable people in Scotland do just that. But there are those, and I'm afraid it's nearly half, who are not claimed, who are left alone. For them, life is difficult. In fact, the personal and societal cost is tragic. If in this Parliament we want to make change, if we want to halve the adult prison population, then transform care. If we want to cut by 1/3 our rough sleeping population, then transform care. If the scourge of Scotland, which is drugs deaths, which is debated in this chamber often enough, then we need to transform care. The reason this is galling is not just that we spend £1 billion a year on not really looking after these children as well as we could. It's that 10 years ago, Tony MacDonald shared his story along with 1,000 other young people to the First Minister of the SNP government at the time, Nicola Sturgeon. She was affected. She said, "I commit to ripping up this system." She commissioned a care review which led to the promise. And to a large degree, I'm stood in this chamber today because that promise is unfulfilled. It has not got a transformational action plan years on. We do not know what should start, what should stop. We are told it's culturally difficult on the front line to make change. To anyone in this chamber who's worked outside of politics, when someone says there's a cultural problem, you know you have a leadership problem. It is time for change. But the reality of this is more stark. This is a crisis because too many people have died since promises have been made. I will now name a few of those who were known to me and my friends. I will not give their full name, but I will give their ages. Chloe, aged 19. Violet, aged 21. Rachel, aged 25. Darryl, aged 19. Mikey, aged 17. Katie, aged 23. Michael, aged 16. Ian, aged 17. Mary Ann, aged 23. Natasha, 16. Alicia, 25. Dexie Lee, 22. I could go on and on. These are only a few of those who have died. They are all care experienced. They are children of the state. They are, by law, the children of the ministers who sit in the benches in the front of this chamber. I estimate Over 2 million days of life will not be lived by those who have died prematurely since promises have been made. My ask today is simple of this government. Commit to publishing the premature death rates of all care-experienced people. We have a moral responsibility to know, but we also then have a baseline to know if we are making progress. What parent doesn't know if their child is alive? I will work constructively to improve this system because, for me, this is a national emergency. It may well be endemic and become normalised, but it must change. So I thank you. If we want to be ambitious for Scotland, let's start with our children. We have all the powers already in our constitution here to do that. I dedicate this speech to Tony MacDonald. He also died in an accident on the 2nd of September 2022. Thank you.
I call Rachel Hamilton, who has 4 minutes, but we do have time in hand.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to welcome you to your role, and I'd also like to welcome everybody during their maiden speeches today. I do remember back in 2016 making mine, and it is quite a daunting thing to do. I am disappointed today by the SNP's motion or the first debate, because it fundamentally fails to recognise what the Scottish public so desperately want their government to be focused on. And today it seems we have drawn the dividing lines between unionism and nationalism. And voters of all political persuasions are saying to me that they wish their government would focus on the things that matter. And all of us have spoken about that, no matter the topic of independence, such as lowering, staggering and rising bills, helping people to keep their businesses afloat by dealing with the non-domestic rate revaluation, improving educational standards, stamping out violence in schools, dealing with crime, stopping crime, and ending the relentless obsession with fringe issues, which we spent most of the last session arguing about. And these should be our priorities, whether we are a unionist or a nationalist. But Russell Finlay has already said that he was surprised that this is what we start talking about as our first debate on independence. We've had that debate. We had a vote. There was an 85% turnout in 2014, and the public expressed their opinion clearly. Now, during the last parliamentary session, the SNP claimed that the SNP majority in the Holyrood election would be a mandate for independence. They claimed that a pro-independence majority would give them the right to further pursue an independence referendum. And their friends in the Greens, who also agree with letting prisoners out of prisons, will return to this Parliament with a tally of votes that reduced by 400,000, something that none of them have actually talked about today. And whilst the support for unionist parties actually barely changed. Yes, I will.
Lloyd Melville.
Thank you very much. It was just to ask her whether she really believed that the 12 disciples of Toryism are really the best arbiter of public opinion following their drubbing.
Rachel Hamilton.
I would say back to Lloyd Melville that I'm very proud of the blue wall that has maintained and stopped an SNP majority, I would have to say. And it was my win and the win of my colleague Finlay Carson and Craig Hoy that has absolutely scuppered the chances of the separatists. Presiding Officer, the SNP simply have not managed to reach their goal, have they? And I'm a bit surprised at Reform as well, because Reform failed to put forward an amendment to the motion, and clearly they're just letting the SNP off scot-free. That's on top of letting them take a number of seats across Scotland too. Now, the Scottish Government already have huge devolved powers in health, education, justice, housing, transport and some parts of taxation. We are one of the most powerful parliaments in the world, and I'm proud to be part of that and proud to be re-elected here. But they are demanding more powers. We've heard it before. Why don't they use the current ones, Deputy Presiding Officer? Why don't they give businesses certainty, or, deal with the unresolved question about currency and central banking and public finances and borrowing powers and all the rest of it, the questions that they can't even answer about regulations and pensions? Who wants to intervene? Yes, go on then, Alan Brown.
intervention. We've already heard the argument that this is one of the most powerful devolved parliaments in the world. Sadly, it's not even the most powerful devolved Assembly or Parliament in the UK. Northern Ireland has got powers over constitution, pensions, social security and even the civil service. So shouldn't they actually be arguing that we should at least have parity with other devolved parliaments, let alone our argument about full independence?
Rachel Hamilton.
Alan Brown thinks the grass is greener, but he can't even deal with his own lawn. Isn't that a shame? Can't even get the number of GPs that we need. Promise drop-in clinics, presiding officer. Oh dear, there's an 6-hour waiting list, according to an FOI, in their trial clinic, and they can't even get GPs to fill them. Oh dear, I think Alan Brown's got a lot to learn in this place. But businesses want certainty, we know that, and oil and gas workers in the North East, they want certainty. And I'm really pleased that Jackie Dunbar has said that she agrees with drill baby drill, and Liam Kerr, my colleague, was very pleased about that. So we'll make sure that we tell the voters in Aberdeen South that the SNP will agree with the drill baby drill. So we do need to support our NHS. We need to reduce crime. Presiding officer, the Scottish Conservatives will always stand against the SNP's obsession with independence. We just hope the other unionist parties will join us. Thank you.
Gillian Mackay, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. From some people in this chamber, I think the response to this debate has been pretty predictable. Not just the earliest mention of Paisley ever from George Adam, but the usual old clichés about independence. For anyone who did have their bingo card out, we had 7 mentions of division, 5 that we have an obsession, and we were called separatists at least 5 times. The Unionist parties are in severe need of new patter, as Rachel Hamilton's just shown us, as well as credible arguments. Many across the chamber have mentioned really serious issues that we need to work together to achieve. The NHS, schools, the cost of living crisis. We absolutely need to see the NHS put on a sustainable footing, making sure that patients have the appointments they need and that we look after our staff. We need to see more ASN teachers and support staff into our schools, reduce class sizes and tackle teacher wellbeing and workload. We need to make sure that we insulate homes, move to sustainable ways to heat our homes and support those living in fuel poverty. But I'm a bit sad that many of my colleagues lack so much ambition that they don't think we can do more than one thing at once. As Ross Greer said, the mental gymnastics have been incredible. The issue of mandates would have been amusing had it not been so duplicitous. Labour have said their 24 mandate was against a referendum because of their vote share, but are happy to ignore mandates here. From what I followed of Lord Offer's contribution, he tried to break down the numbers from IndyRef. His former party took Scotland out of Europe against its will, and the mandate for that? Well, on a turnout of 72.2% of registered votes, 51.9% voted leave, 48.1% voted remain. That means, by his logic, only 37.3% of people voted for Brexit. No mandate at all, even by his standards. What we haven't heard from any party opposed to independence is how Scotland gets to have its say. The youngest people who voted in the referendum in 2014 are now in their late 20s. And I hate to break it to some of the new MSPs in here, your late 20s is hardly young anymore. Hundreds of thousands, this is from a formerly young person, hundreds of thousands of young people have never had their say on the direction of the country, despite some having been able to vote in 3 Holyrood and 3 Westminster elections. How much longer do people in this chamber want to deny democracy to those young people? How many more years do they have to wait before they get to have their say? And that's a level of honesty we haven't seen from those who oppose independence. Too often it's once in a generation that's thrown around. It would have been the very oldest of Gen Z that got to vote in 2014. We now have the very oldest of Gen Alpha being able to vote this year for the first time. Literally a generation. That also doesn't include the thousands like me who voted no in 2014 and have changed their mind. And if they aren't willing to answer how long is long enough between expressions of democracy, surely they can't deny the circumstances we find ourselves in compared to 2014 are so different to back then. We've had a Brexit that Scotland didn't vote for, which has materially impacted life for everyone in this country. We've had a merry-go-round of Prime Ministers, which doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. A series of UK governments that couldn't have Scotland any further down the priority list, and that's without the looming danger of a far-right government in the UK. In any single one of those scenarios, let alone combined, a nation in a so-called voluntary union would want a say on their future outside of that. But actually, for myself and for the Scottish Greens, it isn't just about what we're leaving behind, but actually the Scotland we want to build and the Scotland that we could be. Independence should be a mechanism to deliver that fairer, greener and more equal society. It should be the mechanism we use to rejoin the EU back where we should have always been. It stops us having to work round policies and decisions that we can and should be taking by ourselves. We have a pro-independence majority in this chamber, and I don't think we're in a situation anymore where another referendum is an if. It's a when. We can't sit back, though. We have to, as a movement, prove to the people of Scotland why those decisions would be better in our hands, using the powers we have to make Scotland a fairer and more prosperous place. Tackling child poverty, making childcare fit for how families live now, tackling the cost of living crisis, being an open and welcoming society that recognises the value of all Scots alike. We have to take that fight to the UK Government. Let's test the boundaries of devolution, venture into those grey areas to achieve our aims, do things that any Labour government still holding true to their values would find difficult to take to court and challenge. This is a fight we have to win, and we have to work here with that in mind.
And for a first speech, Julie McDougall.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And firstly, I wish to offer my congratulations to you. It's a privilege to be elected to this chamber and to make my first maiden speech today. So I wish to begin by congratulating all colleagues on their election and to thank all voters and volunteers. Deputy Presiding Officer, I would also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to my late father, John McDougall, a respected and dedicated Fife politician and a true champion of the people. It was his passing that set me on this path. But like him, I will always stand up for our communities first and foremost. Alongside my 16 Reform UK colleagues, I have been given a mandate by our communities, and that is to serve the people of Mid-Scotland and Fife and Scotland as a whole by prioritising what matters most to them. Our job is to listen, to be honest and to shape policy based on what we hear from the grassroots of our communities. As a local councillor, I am only too aware of these day-to-day issues, and let me share what I hear and see every day. The cost of living where people are unable to heat their homes or afford food and are relying on food banks. Employment where people who have the desire and ability to work yet struggle to find a decent, well-paid job. NHS and social care, people are unable to access appointments for procedures such as hip operations and are using their hard-earned life savings to pay for this privately, even going abroad in too many cases. Education, parents are having to pay for extra tuition for their children, and those who can't afford are simply left behind due to pressures placed on our education system. Teachers are under enormous pressure. Policing, police are overburdened and constrained in their execution of their duties. Drug deaths, we have the highest rate of drug deaths in Europe. Young people, lack of opportunities. I want to see young people who don't choose university to have the option, as I did, to take on an apprenticeship, offering them hope for their future. Businesses, over 340 businesses approximately, are closing weekly in Scotland. Farmers, working all hours and with little return, struggling to make an income for their family. Housing, we're now in a housing emergency where overcrowding conditions are simply unacceptable. And our veterans, We must support our veterans and ensure that they have access to decent housing and support services. Councils. Our councils are continuously underfunded and they go each year, cap in hand, begging this government, please sir, can I have some more? I've seen this happen too many times in Fife Council budget discussions in particular. Our schools, hospitals and college estates deteriorating. Potholes, crumbling roads and unsafe pavements. And so it continues. However, if we focus on the day job, we have an opportunity to prepare and tackle these challenges, working collectively to rectify this mess. I have listened carefully since arriving in this chamber, and it is clear so many members here, including our new presiding officer, have confessed this Parliament since opening has not been used to its fullest potential. But I think there is a unique opportunity here and much work to do, and we should do the right thing for the people in our communities across Scotland and get to work in their interests and not ours. As we know, with power comes great responsibility, so I would say to the First Minister to use his power wisely and offer our nation no more division. This Parliament serves with a mandate of only 53% of Scots who voted and will need to tackle a massive government spending deficit. I would say we need to work together, and our collective mission should be to encourage the other 47% of disillusioned Scots to vote next time round and restore faith in our politicians. It is because of this that I cannot support the First Minister's motion. His government already has a poor track record spanning nearly 2 decades. And with so many pressing issues facing Scotland, a second referendum on separation is completely tone-deaf to the concerns of our people. So meantime, let's focus on getting the basics right, fix broken Scotland as our priority for the next 5 years in this underperforming Parliament, and together make this Parliament work to its fullest potential and thrive for the Scottish people. And I look forward to working with all of you cross-party in doing so. Thank you.
I call on Jackie Baillie, who has 5 minutes, but we do still have time in hand.
That's good to know, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by commending all the MSPs who made their maiden speeches today? I don't agree with all of the content, I have to say, but I very much welcome them to this Parliament. So Kate Campbell, Donald McKinnon, Lloyd Melville, Patricia Gibson, Senga Beresford, Alex Kerr, Julie McDougall, Michelle Campbell, Kayleigh Kinross O'Neill, and of course Duncan Dunlop, who I thought made an excellent speech that reminded us why we are in this place. Presiding Officer, the SNP claim to be ambitious for Scotland, but what matters to the Scottish people is delivery. So I will judge them on their promises and how they keep them, but their track record doesn't fill me with confidence. Because under the SNP, we have 10,000 children in temporary accommodation without a home to call their own. 7 of Scotland's ferries out of use in a single day. 42% of our children leaving school without a single hire. The promise to end NHS waits over a year by March 2026, but 32,000 are still waiting. And there are thousands more waiting more than 2 years. If that is the extent of the SNP's ambition, I worry for our country. Scots know that the SNP aren't delivering. That's why just 1 in 5 Scots who could vote chose the SNP. Try as he might to suggest otherwise, the First Minister doesn't actually have a mandate for independence. He said time after time that only an SNP majority would deliver another referendum. He rejected the notion that the Greens would count towards that tally. I'm sure he didn't, though, expect today to get assistance from Malcolm Offord. I have to admit I was very confused by Malcolm Offord's contribution, and I'm not sure it was helped by his microphone being turned on. So let's call this debate... I was just checking to see if you were all awake. So let's call this debate what it is. It's designed to stoke grievance and division, to hide from their record in government, and this in the week that former SNP Chief Executive pled guilty to embezzling more than £400,000. That money, donated by members from their own hard-earned cash, was supposed to fund the next campaign for independence. Now, I'll make some progress if you don't mind. But instead of doing that, Peter Murrell spent it on a Jag, a mobile home, a salt and pepper grinder worth £2,600, jewellery, makeup and a range of high-end household goods. Shopping at Harrods and Fortnum and Masons was a regular thing. So how on earth does a luxury salt and pepper grinder advance the cause of independence? I think we should be told. But Murrell did all this while married to the SNP First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. That happened under her nose, in the party and in her own home. And it's astonishing for a woman so smart and over the detail. But she has, of course, in fairness to her, issued statements denying any knowledge of that. Russell Findlay was right. I'll take an intervention.
Lorna Slater.
Jackie Baillie is presenting some pretty scraping of the barrel stuff here when she could be talking about how great the union is, but I don't think she talks about how great she thinks the union is, and she won't allow an independence referendum because I think she knows she would lose an independence referendum, and that's the real reason why the Labour government in Westminster won't call for one.
Jackie Baillie.
I am happy to take interventions, but fantasy interventions is just too much. It may be what the member chooses to think, but it doesn't reflect the reality of the doorsteps I was on across Scotland. Because Russell Findlay was right about the First Minister in his contribution, because he did know Peter Murrell well. In fact, he appointed him. He went on TV as Deputy First Minister in 2021 and said he had no idea why his colleagues resigned in protest from the SNP's National Executive Committee. This was after a report was made to the police. It's frankly mind-boggling that John Swinney, as a former Finance Secretary and now First Minister, was unaware of what was happening to the money in his own party, but thinks that he should be trusted with Scotland's finances. And there are people sitting in this room as MSPs and indeed ministers who covered up the scandal, who bullied colleagues into silence, who must take their share of the blame for their lack of action. The SNP playbook means a response that has more to do with spin and secrecy rather than being open and accountable. The level of secrecy and complacency erodes public trust in the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government and in politicians overall. The First Minister does need to be open and needs to open up the Scottish Government to scrutiny so that ministers are held accountable for delivery and we restore some of that public trust. He must make the priorities of Scots his priorities. George Adam is right. This is about people. Their priorities that I heard on the doorstep were about tackling the cost of living crisis, making life more affordable, ensuring our young people learn and succeed, delivering trains, buses and ferries that run on time, reducing NHS waiting times, ending the 8 a.m. rush for the GP and fixing the social care crisis. That's what being ambitious for Scotland looks like. Stop the division, stop blaming somebody else, and the government must deliver because that is what they will rightly be judged on.
I call on Jenny Gilruth to wind up on behalf of the Scottish Government.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is my first contribution in the Parliament since the election, and I therefore wish to begin by placing on record my gratitude to the people of the Mid-Fife and Glenrothes constituency for re-electing me to serve them in our national Parliament. It is a privilege for all of us to serve in this place, and that privilege was deepened in my new role as Deputy First Minister, and I am sincerely grateful to the First Minister for the opportunity to serve my country in this capacity. And I know that I speak on behalf of the entire SNP parliamentary group when I say a heartfelt thank you to John Swinney for his leadership throughout. He lifted our party up, he led us forward, and John Swinney delivered the 5th successive SNP Scottish Government. And following that emphatic result, the first Scottish Government debate in this 7th session of our reconvened National Parliament is rightly focused on the future of our nation. Now, this afternoon we've heard a range of different contributions from colleagues across the Chamber, and I thank colleagues for those contributions to the debate. And I particularly welcome those of you who were speaking in their first debate in the Chamber, and I will come on to make commentary on those remarks in due course. But at the start of this debate, the First Minister set out this Government's priorities, creating a prosperous, secure and a fairer country. And those missions aren't just our priorities. These are the priorities of the people of Scotland. They reflect the issues that came up time and again on the doorsteps throughout the election. And as the First Minister put it, this was a cost of living election. On the doorsteps, I'm sure every single MSP heard that clearly. The food shop, energy bills, even just being able to afford the journey to work. People told us they wanted a government who will be on their side. And I want to come on now to the contributions, and I particularly would like to start with the new MSPs. And one point of agreement I do have with Rachel Hamilton is that we were both elected 10 years ago, and she talked about the nervousness people would have in their first contribution. So I very much welcome the spirit I think we've seen from new MSPs and their positivity this afternoon. It has been a breath of fresh air, let me tell you, compared to the previous session. I want to start with Kate Campbell. Of course, the first woman, I think, to make a contribution to the debate this afternoon. We had to wait approximately an hour for that. But I do welcome Kate Campbell to our Parliament as the new MSP for Edinburgh Eastern. She is right to speak about that optimism and hope that people are asking for, and of course that the people voted for. Listening to Kate Campbell recount the different political challenges that Scotland had faced, and that opportunism, I think, that we've seen from the far right was extremely powerful. And she said it is not immigrants who have created this cost of living crisis, and I think Parliament roundly agrees with that sentiment. We also heard from Donald McKinnon, the new MSP for the Western Isles, and I think it is a mark of the man that Mr McKinnon paid tribute to Dr Alistair Allen. I spent a good deal of my time, it will come as no surprise to Mr McKinnon, in the Western Isles as Transport Minister, so I know how important connectivity is in his constituency. And in that regard, I give him a commitment that this government will do all that we can to engage with him directly on these issues, as we have done throughout the previous years. I'm also sure, though, his allegation that his constituency is the most beautiful parts of the country will have to sit on the shelf. There may be a level of disagreement to that end. Now, Lloyd Melville, the new MSP for Angus South, I would just like to pay tribute to. I know that Graham Day will be extremely proud of Mr Melville and his contribution here, and he, of course, campaigned alongside Lloyd to secure his election to Parliament. But Lloyd Melville reminded us about the journey to this place, the campaigning, the normalisation of the existence of this Parliament for his generation and those yet to come. Living well with our neighbours, Mr Melville commented on, that should be our ambition for all. And I think that sentiment is one which was carried throughout a number of contributions this afternoon. Patricia Gibson, of course, a fellow former teacher and the new MSP for Cunningham South, spoke about Ruth Maguire, who colleagues in the Chamber will know well. Like me, Ruth was part of the 2016 intake, and she will be much missed on these benches. But Patricia Gibson quite rightly spoke about the progress we have delivered under this government in relation to free tuition, the expansion of early learning and childcare, and of course there not being a limit on our ambitions. And that's been a key part of this afternoon's debate. That's the purpose of this afternoon's debate. We know that the status quo is not as good as it gets. The people do, as Patricia Gibson quite rightly observed, have a right to choose their future. They should have an opportunity to express their views on the country's future. We heard, of course, from a number of new MSPs, Senga Beresford from Reform, and I welcome her to her place. I'm afraid I'm not going to agree with her characterisation of Scotland's education system, but I can agree with her on a point that she made in relation to the Scottish people, because she talked about them making their priorities clear. And of course, this is now a Parliament with the largest ever majority support for independence. So I agree with Ms Beresford on that point. She might not like it, and we can agree to disagree on those matters, but it simply cannot be wished away. We heard too this afternoon from Alex Kerr, now the new MSP for Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. And again, I just want to pay tribute to Mr Kerr. For those of us on these benches, we are sincerely proud that Christina McKelvey's constituency is once again represented by an SNP MSP. And Mr Kerr said, if they, the opposition, were confident in the strength of their conviction, why would they fear giving them a say, Scotland's people, on their future? And that is a question we have not heard an answer to this afternoon throughout the debate. What is the fear about asking the people their views on our constitutional future? I move now to Michelle Campbell, a fellow Fifer, and of course who replaced Natalie Dawn Innes in this place, my former Minister for Children and Young People, who again will be much missed from the Chamber. But Michelle Campbell brings with her a wealth of experience to the Chamber from her time as a nurse, which this Parliament will benefit from. But she also brings that political experience because, like so many people since 2014, she has changed her mind. And you're allowed to change your mind, Presiding Officer, on who you vote for and the constitutional position of this country. And in a voluntary union, people should be able to change their minds. So just as Michelle Campbell did, the Government puts forward a proposal today to ask again to run that referendum, to ask the people to give their views on Scotland's future. Kayleigh Kinross-O'Neill, now I do actually feel quite old because I think Miss Kinross-O'Neill was a couple of months old, she said, in 1999, but I do welcome her youthfulness to this place nonetheless. And she spoke really powerfully about her own personal experiences, about barriers, and she drew a strong analogy between the barriers she's faced and those that Scotland faces today. And I know that she will bring her powerful experience to be a strong advocate for her community in this place, and I expect to be held to account on those points in the coming months, Presiding Officer. Now, we heard, of course, from Paisley's MSP, George Adam. He is back. And, of course, these benches are delighted to see that. He spoke passionately about the negativity in the election campaign from some corners. And I have to say that from some members of the Chamber of the Opposition, rather, we've heard that continue this afternoon. But George Adam also spoke about belief, fairness, that opportunity to drive improvement. We want to build a country to unlock Scotland's real potential. What's so wrong about that, Presiding Officer? What is the fear that's holding Scotland back? I am mindful, Presiding Officer, of time. It would be remiss of me not to mention the contribution from Duncan Dunlop. Now, many colleagues across the Chamber will know Mr Dunlop from his advocacy and work through Who Cares, but his work on behalf of the care experience community is admirable. I know that he will use his experience again to hold the Government to account, but I thought he spoke really powerfully today, particularly on behalf of a young man, of course, who he spoke about in great detail, and I give way to Mr Dunlop.
So I would thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for giving way. I would ask if you would commit to recording the premature deaths of all care experienced people. Thank you.
I'm certainly happy to take that ask away from the member this afternoon. And finally, Julie McDougall made her initial contribution to the Chamber today. And of course, back to the Kingdom of Fife, Julie McDougall is the daughter of the former Labour MP for Glenrothes, and I know that her father is fondly recalled in my constituency for the service he provided over a number of years. Presiding Officer, a government which is ambitious and which is going to prioritise this cost of living crisis is absolutely essential. Our people want a government who are going to back our businesses, not just protecting them from economic headwinds, but seizing new opportunities to help grow our economy. They want to see the benefits of that prosperity reflected in their daily lives and the services that they use. The First Minister earlier set out just some of the bold and innovative action that we will take to support people and businesses in Scotland in these really challenging times. Working to bring down the cost of the family shop, helping more young people to afford their first home, capping bus fares to help with the cost of living. These are just some of the ambitious policies that will provide transformative change for families, communities and our country. And we will transform the way people access our public services. Presiding Officer, I'm mindful of time, and in closing, the First Minister has set out a clear and ambitious vision today, a vision that we are starting to deliver in this first 100 days. It is a vision that will create a wealthier Scotland, one where wealth is shared, where people can see the benefits of our collective efforts in their own lives and in the services that they use. And as we've seen in today's debate, there are things that divide us, but there is also plenty that unites us. The vision that we have set out is one that I'm sure is shared by many across this chamber, even if we differ on the path to realising it. So where there is common ground, I invite you to work with us. Gillian Mackay was right to point out last week that those parties who were able to extract things from the government in the last session benefited at the ballot box. So challenge us, engage with us, help us to deliver for our people. They, more than ever, demand a parliament which can urgently respond to the cost of living crisis. They have voted for a parliament of minorities where parties must reach out across their dividing lines to help improve our country. And the 7th session of Scotland's reconvened national parliament must be a parliament which truly works to serve all of the people of Scotland. Presiding Officer.
Thank you, and that concludes the debate on Ambitious for Scotland. The next item of business is an urgent question in relation to Peter Murrell. As Mr Murrell has still not been sentenced, the hearing is scheduled for 23rd of June. The case remains active for contempt of court purposes and the sub judice rule is engaged. However, given Mr Murrell has pled guilty, there will be no jury trial evidence and sentencing will be overseen by a judge. The risk of prejudice to the proceedings and contempt of court as a result of commentary in Parliament is significantly reduced. Therefore, given public interest in this matter and the low risk of contempt, I exercise my discretion to allow the question and permit discussion in the Chamber. Reputationally, in order to respect the role of the courts, the principle of comity and separation of powers, I expect members not to comment on Mr Murrell's sentencing, i.e. how long he should be sentenced for, etc. Members who wish to speak should press their buttons now and ask short, succinct questions, if chosen, with answers to match. I now call Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact on public confidence in political institutions in Scotland following the guilty plea entered by former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell in recent court proceedings.
First Minister.
President Officer, Peter Murrell's guilty plea yesterday confirmed that the Scottish National Party, the ordinary members of my party, were embezzled out of hundreds of thousands of pounds of funds. His admission reveals a terrible breach of trust and an overwhelming betrayal. As Assistant Chief Constable Stuart Houston of Police Scotland said yesterday, this was a lengthy and extremely complex case due to the scale of criminality over a 12-year period and the lengths Peter Murrell went to try to cover his tracks. There has been an extensive police investigation into this matter over several years, during which every relevant aspect has been pored over by the authorities, and this has led to a guilty plea for the person responsible. I hope the fact that Peter Murrell is now facing the consequences of his actions can provide the public with some confidence that no matter who you are, the police and Scotland's courts will act with integrity and impartiality in all cases.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. Presiding Officer, let's spell out what happened here. In 2021, Nicola Sturgeon denied that there was anything untoward in the SNP's finances. Months later, Police Scotland opened a formal investigation, and in April 2023, a tent was erected by Police Scotland in Nicola Sturgeon's family home, and Peter Murrell was arrested. The SNP's former chief executive appeared in court in March 2025, charged with embezzlement, and Nicola Sturgeon was let off without charge. Yesterday, Peter Murrell pled guilty to embezzling £400,000. Given that it was the First Minister himself who appointed Peter Murrell, can the First Minister tell the public if he believes that his judgment was lacking?
First Minister.
This is an incredibly difficult and painful case, and the actions that have been addressed in court yesterday are the actions of one individual, Peter Murrell, and he has broken the law, he's acted in a criminal fashion and has embezzled out of my party's funds hundreds of thousands of pounds. That is the consequence of the actions of Peter Murrell. Now, my decision to appoint as part of an interview process Peter Murrell 25 years ago, before any of this behaviour started, is, I think, somewhat irrelevant. What has happened here is a complete and utter betrayal of trust by a trusted individual, and that should never have happened. And that's the responsibility of Peter Murrell and Peter Murrell alone.
Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, I thank the First Minister for that answer again, but John Swinney is desperately trying to sweep this scandal under the carpet and denied there was any problem in 2021, and that is on record. Now, Peter Murrell will rightly face the full force of the law, but the public will question why the former First Minister did not face investigation. Nicola Sturgeon denies any knowledge of her husband's crimes despite using a £700 pen whilst checking the time on her £5,000 watch and sipping coffee from a £3,000 coffee machine. Now, this is unbelievable, Presiding Officer. Normal married couples would question where this money came from. The Lord Advocate is responsible for all criminal prosecutions in Scotland. She sits in the SNP Cabinet. Can the First Minister tell the Chamber whether the Lord Advocate will publish the reasons why the Crown Office did not pursue charges against Nicola Sturgeon?
First Minister.
I think we're getting into incredibly inappropriate territory here in Rachel Hamilton's question. The first point I want to make is the idea that I am sweeping this under the carpet. Rachel Hamilton appears to have missed the fact that I held a press conference yesterday afternoon and for 50 minutes answered the questions that were put to me by the media. Jackie Bailey demanded that I do such a thing, and I was putting it in place. Secondly, as Rachel Hamilton might have noticed, I'm on my feet in the Scottish Parliament answering an urgent question. So I think it's worthy of some respect for the fact that these issues are being addressed here by the First Minister. And as for some of the comments that Rachel Hamilton has made, where she is essentially questioning the independent decisions of the prosecution system in Scotland, when I've placed on the record the fact that the public should take confidence from the fact that no matter who you are, the police and Scotland's courts will act with integrity and impartiality in all cases, is an absolute foundation of our judicial system and the application of the rule of law. Now, when I went to the court last Wednesday to take my oath in front of Lord Pentland reminded me and the country that there are three pillars of authority in this state: the judiciary, Parliament and the government. And they are all independent. But he also said for the rule of law to prevail, each must respect the other.
Absolutely.
And what Rachel Hamilton has put on the record today in that question is disrespectful to the judicial system in this country. It is an insult to the rule of law, and it should not be tolerated in this Parliament.
Jackie Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. We have warned consistently about the rotten culture of secrecy and cover-up at the heart of the SNP government. We've seen this during the Salmond inquiry, the legal challenge to the Information Commissioner, and at its most extreme, the embezzlement of SNP supporters' money. A complaint was made to the police about the SNP's finances in March 2021. In May that year, John Swinney appeared on the Sunday Politics show and said he had no idea why the party's treasurer resigned. In June, Nicola Sturgeon said money hadn't gone missing and there was nothing to see here. I'm not sure if any of that reflects the truth. So, Presiding Officer, can I ask, how can the public trust John Swinney when he is the man who is the architect of this culture of secrecy?
Presiding Officer.
Well, we really are in the depths of it all today with that question from Jackie Bailey. So let me just walk through some of the points that Jackie Bailey has raised today. The first point I want to make is this, that Jackie Bailey has, on the first sitting day of a debate, questioned my integrity and my truthfulness. Jackie Bailey spent the best part of 5 years in the last Parliament questioning my integrity and my truthfulness. And I invite her to look at the election results and see how far it got the behaviour of the Labour Party. And if there's anybody that epitomised that whole smearing of people's characters, Jackie Bailey is at the front of the queue of the last Parliament, and I would have thought she might have learnt the lessons before she came in and started doing it on this occasion today. In addition to that point, the issue that is at the heart of this case is about deception and criminality. That is the responsibility of Peter Murrell. That is what this case is about: deception and criminality. That was highlighted in the statement that I've already made in quoting from Police Scotland. But let me give the Chamber another extract from the Police Scotland statement. It talks about how there was an attempt between 2010 and 2022 to carefully hide his criminality with false receipts and accounting. That is what deception is about. And that is what my party and many individuals are victims of as a consequence of the actions of Peter Murrell. Now, we've taken action as a party to address these issues, and we have good and strong governance in place under my leadership, and that's what my party has a right to expect. But what I think also there's an entitlement to expect in this Parliament: some decent respect for the integrity of individuals, which Jackie Bailey sadly lacked in her contribution today.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, Nicola Sturgeon stated yesterday that she knew nothing of the £125,000 camper van parked in her mother-in-law's drive until the police informed her of it. Yet an SNP source quoted in the Daily Record the week it was seized passed it off as a legitimate SNP resource for a COVID election, describing it as, and I quote, a mobile campaign room. I hope that Police Scotland have unravelled the inconsistency of those two positions. Presiding Officer, if we are to believe the narrative account of the former First Minister that this was not a criminal conspiracy, then it follows that this was, in fact, a catastrophic failure of financial oversight. So can I ask the First Minister, if his party leadership cannot steward the accounts of the Scottish National Party, why on earth should our constituents trust them with the finances of our nation?
First Minister.
I don't think it's the place of Parliament to be carrying out investigations that the police have themselves carried out. I think that is if I was to suggest any of that from this place, I would be breaching my commitments in the Ministerial Code. So if that obligation and burden is on me, then I don't see why it is not on Mr Cole-Hamilton and Parliament. And the second point I would make is that the issues that are at the heart of this case, and I made this in my answer to Jackie Bailey, these issues are about criminality. They are about the rules being flouted. They are about the rules being bypassed. That's what the police explanation was about yesterday, that the rules had been bypassed by, and to quote Assistant Chief Constable Houston, an extremely complex case where Peter Murrell went to extraordinary lengths to try and cover his tracks. So the explanation is very straightforward. There were rules in place and they were flouted by criminality. And that is what the police investigation has found, and that is what has been addressed in the courts yesterday. Now, it is incredibly painful to my party to be experiencing all of this and all of the impact of all of it, but we are the victims of criminality, and that's what I make clear to Parliament is the root of this issue today.
Stephen Kerr.
One of the most damning aspects of all this, and the First Minister should be aware of this, is that Nicola Sturgeon, it's now said, claimed to be cooperating with the police investigation, but her reply to every question was no comment. Does the First Minister have any self-awareness about how all of this looks to the people of Scotland? And one of the things that sticks in the throats of a lot of people is that the trial was supposed to take place before the election, but was mysteriously postponed to a date after the election. There is undoubtedly a political advantage to the SNP because of that postponement. So why was the hearing postponed, and who authorised the date's change of the proceedings?
Before the First Minister intervenes, I would remind that the judiciary is independent in Scotland.
Presiding Officer, I don't know if Mr Kerr misspoke, but Mr Kerr said the trial was supposed to take place before the election. That is not a truthful statement or an accurate statement. The trial was never scheduled before the election. There was a preliminary hearing in February at which a judge, a member of the Court of Session, agreed to the preliminary hearing taking place on the date it took place, which was yesterday. Now, if we as a Parliament, and this is me back to what I said about what Lord Pentland said to the court when I took my oath last Wednesday, if we start second-guessing and pointing the finger, which is what Mr Kerr has just done, pointed the finger at judges exercising their judicial independence, then we are not respecting the independence of the judiciary. And I want to make one thing clear to this Parliament. I will, to my last breath, defend the independence of the judiciary to decide on these issues, because that is the protection for everyone in the face of the rule of law. It's a foundation of our society, and we should dabble with it at our peril in the fashion that Mr Kerr has dabbled with it today.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister agree with those who suggest that it is inappropriate for serving government ministers to sit on the SNP's National Executive Committee while serious questions hang over its handling of concerns around SNP finances?
No, because the constitution of my party requires, for example, that I am a member of my party's National Executive Committee. This Parliament has chosen me to be the First Minister of Scotland, and I cannot see how I lead my party if I am not a member of its National Executive Committee. The internal governance of my party is a matter for my party, and also, I might say, the internal governance of my party is in a very strong position, as we have just demonstrated by the way in which we prepared for and took forward an election campaign that resulted in the 5th successive term of an SNP government and the election of 58 members of the Scottish Parliament with over 38% of the vote. That is a party in good shape, in my view.
Polly McNeill.
I do agree with the First Minister that we should not second-guess the courts. But does the First Minister agree that how such decisions, such as a trial, are made do matter to the public, and how they view all government institutions and decisions that they make, that not only are they fair, but they must be seen to be so? And the legal process may be at its end, but does the First Minister agree that the accountability for what happened in the first place cannot be ended, not just for the sake of party politics or parliamentary politics, but for the sake of all those whistleblowers and people who challenge institutions in the first place when it's a very hard thing to do?
First Minister.
Polly McNeill knows the justice system well because she's a long-serving member of the Criminal Justice Committee of this Parliament. Indeed, she and I served on that committee for 12 months in 2023-24. So she will know that the timetabling of individual cases and the possibility of delay is a very, very regular item in court scheduling and court processes. So this is not. So the point I made to Mr Kerr, where he was completely wrong about what he said, was that the decision to defer the hearing from February until May was not some exceptional incident. That happens on a very regular basis. Indeed, I might even go as far as to say, I might be stretching it to say it's invariably the case, but it is very much the case that hearings are delayed. And then when it comes to the question of accountability, well, the accountability here is the fact that an individual has perpetrated criminality at the expense of the hard-contributed donations of my party members the length and breadth of the country. And Polly McNeill will know, like me, we both work in voluntary political parties. We know that members work hard to raise money and they make their contributions, and I'm profoundly grateful to every one of them and I'm horrified by what has happened in this case. But the accountability for that is with Peter Murrell, who has betrayed the trust of the members of my party.
Graham Simpson.
Thank you. Scrutiny is important in this place and it's important in political parties. But scrutiny was shut down in the SNP over its finances. And people were basically told to button it. Nicola Sturgeon said there was nothing to see. Does the First Minister now regret that that approach was taken?
First Minister.
I don't want to sully the atmosphere tonight, but I don't think Reform UK are in the strongest position to challenge me about financial transparency when Nigel Farage is dodging accountability on a £5 million contribution made to him personally for which he has not made proper accountability. So forgive me for being a little bit sceptical about people who run into the greenhouse throwing stones around on this occasion. I am the leader of the Scottish National Party, and I can assure Mr Simpson, and this will be vouched for by my colleagues who are here with me today and vouch by party members around the country. I lead an open and transparent culture within the SNP. Last Saturday, our party National Executive Committee met. The members of that executive had in front of them full transparency about the management accounts of my party to the 30th of April 2026. It highlighted the amount of money we were raising to fund our election campaign, contributed by decent members of the party around the country. What we were spending our money on to make sure we could have so many SNP MSPs elected to this Parliament, more than any other party in this chamber. So the party's National Executive had a full, open and transparent account of the way in which the party is run under my leadership, and I'm glad that we were able to confidently look back on a successful election that had been well funded by our party members around the country.
And Amanda Bland.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to thank the officers involved in Operation Branchform for their integrity and commitment that led to Peter Murrell's admission of guilt early on in the process. Maybe we can all agree that this is a shameful episode in the history of Scottish politics. I ask the Scottish Government, what internal mechanisms have you and plan to put in place to ensure that this never happens again?
First Minister.
Well, let me associate myself with the point that Amanda Bland has made about the police officers, because they have conducted an investigation which, in collaboration with the Crown, has resulted in a compelling evidence base being made available to in this case, which has resulted in a guilty plea at the earliest and first possible opportunity. In relation to, I'm not quite sure who Amanda Bland is targeting her question at, but what I will say in relation to the two organisations I have the privilege to lead, in the Scottish National Party, we have very stringent financial controls in place, and as I've just recounted to Graham Simpson, the transparency to match. And in relation to the Scottish Government, we have, of course, the comprehensive range of financial measures in place to guarantee accountability to Parliament and the public. The Government itself is audited by Audit Scotland. All of the issues are discussed and aired openly by the Finance Committee of the Parliament, of which you, convener, were a very distinguished chair in the last parliamentary session. And I think members are open to scrutiny by members of all political parties. I'm not sure what the composition of the Finance Committee will be, but there is every opportunity for members to scrutinise the public finances of Scotland. And that gives me the opportunity to make it absolutely crystal clear, in case anybody is in any doubt about it, that the issues that affected the court process yesterday affected the funding only of the Scottish National Party and not public funding in relation to the Scottish Government. So it gives me, Amanda Bland's question gives me the opportunity to state that clearly on the record.
Thank you, First Minister, and apologies to members who were not called for that urgent question, but it's time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of two Parliamentary Bureau motions. I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 149 and 150 on suspension and variation of standing orders.
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question of these motions were put at decision time, to which we now turn, and there are 6 questions put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 105.4 in the name of Anna Sarwar, which seeks to amend Motion 105 in the name of John Swinney on Ambitious for Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote. There will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. The question is that Amendment 105.4 in the name of Anna Sarwar, which seeks to amend Motion 105 in the name of John Swinney on Ambitious for Scotland, be agreed. Please vote now. The vote is closed. The vote was as follows: yes 17, no 84. There were 27 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed to. The next question is Amendment 105.3 in the name of Ross Greer, which seeks to amend Motion 105 in the name of John Swinney on Ambitious for Scotland, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Waking up. The amendment is not agreed to, therefore we'll move to a vote. Members, please cast your votes now. Vote is closed. Voting is as follows: yes 72, no 56. The amendment is therefore agreed to. Next question is Amendment 105.2 in the name of Russell Finlay, which seeks to amend Motion 105 in the name of John Swinney on Ambitious for Scotland, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Please vote now. Voting has closed. They voted as follows: yes 28, no 89, and there were 11 abstentions. The amendment is not agreed to. We therefore move to the next question, which is Amendment 105.1 in the name of Alex Cole-Hamilton, which seeks to amend Motion 105 in the name of John Swinney on Ambitious for Scotland to be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. We move to the vote. Voting is closed. Point of order from Yipe Chowturvey. I call that once again. Yipe Chowturvey. You have a point of order. We have no video or audio, so I'm afraid that vote won't be counted. It's always best to be in the chamber whenever possible, I would suggest. Voting is as follows. Yes, 9, no, 84. There were 34 abstentions. The amendment is not agreed to. The next question, therefore, is that motion 105 in the name of John Swinney, as amended, on Ambitious for Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. Please vote now. Vote is closed. The result of vote in motion 105 in the name of John Swinney as amended is yes 72, no 55. The motion is therefore carried. I propose to ask a single question on 2 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Does any member object? There are no objections. The final question, therefore, is that motions 149 and 150 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on suspension and variation of standing orders be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are. Close decision time. I now close this meeting of Parliament.